And good afternoon and welcome. Good afternoon and welcome to day 3 of the ATN Solutions Summit. I'm John Fain and I'm your host for days 1, 2 and now day 3 of this wonderful conference. It's an opportunity to discuss collaboration between business, government and universities as we look at Australia's innovation future. On behalf of the 5 members of the ATN of the network, together in collaboration with the University of Newcastle, I welcome you all. In a moment, Christopher Pyne joining us. We've heard from Minister Alan Tudge and the Shadow Minister Richard Marles. Today we hear from someone who has seen politics from opposition and government and now is completely free to speak his mind, which, as you all know, he does very, very well indeed. First, though, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you here in Melbourne from the land of the Bunurong Bunwurrung people and the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and express my personal impatience for a treaty or treaties in order to try to address some of the mistakes that we've made in the past. Christopher Pyne literally is one of those politicians for whom introductions are really superfluous. Famous of all things for being a fixer, he's also served at the highest levels of government and has seen politics like making of the sausage from the very most unpleasant parts of the inside. He's now a private business consultant and a to government, has a significant portfolio of clients that he guides through the labyrinth of policy making, and we're incredibly lucky to be able to pick his brains for 15 minutes today. Christopher Pyne, welcome to the ATN Solutions Summit. And we'll get you to unmute and off you go.
Thank you, John. Yes, the host has just asked me to unmute and start my video, and away we go. So thank you so much for asking me to at least start this 3rd day of the ATN Summit. And of course, I know you very well, John, from almost a quarter of a century, really, of sparring on your programs. Always found you to be terribly fair and reasonable, not always agreeing with each other, but then life would be very boring if we did. And I'm very pleased to be part of an ATN Summit because the 5 universities plus Newcastle are very well known to me. I worked closely with them all as the Minister for Education, and as I'm sure those people who are part of this summit will remember, the university's part of that portfolio was of great interest to me. As a traditionalist in education, I fully understood the extraordinary power that the higher education sector has and universities have to drive research, to drive student outcomes, to level out disadvantage across society, as drivers of change and social justice, but also of economy and business and jobs, innovation. And it's a very, very exciting part of the economy and society in which we live. And in the last 18 months, it's been terribly challenged by the obvious things like COVID, which will eventually be resolved over time and go away, and we'll learn to live with it. But by things that will be more likely to hang around for longer than COVID. Issues that get quite a run in the paper briefly and then disappear. But for university administrators, academics, vice chancellors, students, are the challenges that universities will have to face for the years to come. Things like foreign interference, the impact on universities' research capabilities of heavier regulation and heavier interest from government in whom those research collaborations are held with. Things like the relationship with China and the United States, the impact that has post-COVID on the recovery of the international student market, whether that can be replaced or needs to be replaced with other markets around the world. And then there's the ongoing cost pressures with government always seeking to push universities more towards being able to be self-funded rather than government funded, the ongoing argument about reform getting through the Senate versus funding or higher funding for universities. None of these things have gone away. COVID hasn't changed any of that. And so post the COVID, there's going to be a great deal of challenges for universities and financial challenges in particular. And there'll be a shake-up, I think, at the university level, and some universities are affected differently. From a research point of view, the ATN does have a research aspect to its operations, more so than some of the other universities outside the G8, but the G8 will obviously be significantly impacted around research and how they can collaborate and where they can source their funds in the future. And that will also involve the ATN. So that's probably enough just to get the ball rolling, John. And I'm very happy to have a conversation with you about wherever you want to lead me.
The mongrel question first up, and I know how much you enjoy them. Is there some internal hostility within the Liberal Party to universities and higher education?
There isn't. The honest answer to that question is that there is a very deep and long-standing tradition within the Liberal Party in particular of support for universities. And many years ago, I gave a speech at one of the university conferences which startled the audience because I took the mantle of the Menzies government and said that in fact it was the Menzies government that had really invested significantly in universities. And that's true. When my grandfather Morris was at Adelaide University in the 1930s, there were 18,000 students at universities in the country, and there were 8 universities, maybe not even 8. And by the end of the Menzies government, the universities were in the high teens or early 20s. And now, of course, there's 40 universities and over 1 million students. So there's no inbuilt hostility. I think, to be honest, in the Liberal Party, there is a somewhat bewilderment about how whenever we propose a reform, whenever the Liberal Party proposes a reform in government, it's almost impossible to get the university sector to unite behind that reform. And my attempts in the Abbott government, that they had all but one vice chancellor supporting it, was somewhat of a miracle. It still didn't get through the Senate. So I think there's a frustration, not a hostility, but a frustration in government of the difficulty of getting students, the left, universities, administrators, researchers, academics to understand that what's in their best interests, and that getting money out of the government from manna from heaven, showering cash on universities is never going to happen, whoever's in power. So reform needs to happen to give universities more opportunities to find their own sources of revenue. And it's almost impossible to get that reform through our current polity.
But universities aren't expecting buckets of money and blank checks from government, but they wouldn't mind some certainty and clarity and consistency, and even that is missing. So what should universities do to impress upon government that they're by and large happy to enter into this more competitive marketplace? They just want to be left alone and let to get on with the business of doing it, instead of the constant chopping and changing. And overseas students, JobKeeper being denied them and all of the rest of it. It's like no one cares the fact that one of our most successful exports has collapsed in 12 to 15 months, and people don't think that's a problem. It clearly is.
Look, it's a bit of a mystery. And when I was in the role, I did find that the university vice chancellors were very pragmatic about the need for competition, the need to focus on the things which they're good at, their desire to not run courses simply because they needed to maintain revenue, and that there would have to be a quid pro quo with the government about reform. But the vice chancellors weren't able to carry the sector with them. That's no criticism of the vice chancellors. They carried their own area where they could control with them. But the problem with higher education reform, it all gets caught up with this kind of nonsensical sort of government conservatives versus left wing, marching people in the street, getting minister being burnt in effigy, which happens to all education ministers, and they weren't burnt in effigy, they would be failing in their duty. It's all kind of a pantomime, but hiding a much more serious problem, which is the problem that you've identified, which is the inability to drive one of our most significant exports. And in Victoria, it's the highest export education. Wouldn't be right now, of course, because of COVID. And in South Australia, it was the second highest export. And so it needs to be treated that way, as a real driver of economic activity. And I think probably we have to convince the Greens or the crossbenchers, Labor or Liberal, that we need to reform universities. And what is it that they would do that would not sort of harken back to some kind of 60s nirvana, which doesn't exist except in people's fantasies, but actually what would they support that would be good for universities and allow them to thrive? Because if we can't convince the Greens and the crossbenchers, nothing gets done.
Did we put too many eggs in the China student basket? And do you think Chinese students will ever return in the numbers that we saw pre-COVID?
I'm probably not an expert on whether we put too many eggs in the China international student basket. I think we responded to market demands, and there was a huge demand from international students from China. And so universities, tacked their sails to where the international market was leading them. That's proven to be, unwise. Nobody could have predicted the coronavirus pandemic. The question is, what happens now? Obviously, the relationship between Australia and China is being tested at the moment. I think
how far do you expect that testing? How far do you think that tension will go? We're certainly seeing the strengthening of the Japan, India, Australia, US alliance as a counterpoint to China's growing influence in the Pacific and in the Southeast Asian region.
Yes, I think that the relationship with China will improve, and there have been these moments of tension in the past, and they have improved. I think they'll particularly improve because Beijing will realise that squeezing Australia economically hasn't had the desired impact. But more importantly, and I think most people watching will get this part, China's actions against Australia have made their neighbours more nervous, not more likely to move closer to Beijing. In fact, it's reminded the ASEAN nations, Japan, India, and United States and Australia, that we actually need to work more closely together, not be pushed further apart. So in some respects, it's had the opposite impact to what whoever in Beijing has been driving that particular policy. And there's lots of different channels of power in Beijing. Of course, it's a superpower and it's not one homogenous moving institution. I think they will realize that hasn't had the desired impact, and that they'll want to have a better relationship with Australia economically, and that things will right themselves. That doesn't mean that we should just go straight back to expecting international students from China to fill our university paid places, but the market will improve. The question is, will India replace that? And I think the answer to that is probably not.
Because
the Indian population is not as mobile, surprisingly. It's not as well organized as the Chinese middle class. I think India's middle class in terms of education outcomes are where China was about 10 to 15 years ago. And they're very, very different economies. The idea that there are as many Indian young people whose parents want to pay to send them to Australia for education outcomes as there are in China is just not right. Just because the populations are not dissimilar in terms of size doesn't mean that they're the same kinds of societies and economies. And I don't think the Indian population's as mobile. I don't think that they have as much discretionary spending to send their whole families. They might send one child to Australia to be educated, but I don't know if they'll send 2, 3, 4, or 5.
Okay, we've only got a few more minutes. The question of ministerial intervention in government grants, particularly ARC grants, is absolutely crucial to the audience that are listening to you here. Do you expect that trend to be entrenched, or do you think we might see some more independence being given?
Look, I think it will return to the previous resting position of the minister or the department and the government, which was that there is a independent process to assess research applications, and it has to be an extremely rare moment that a minister or a department intervenes in a grant application process.
Is that
power is
independence
there, of course.
respected? Is that really genuinely respected, the independence?
Yes, it is. I mean, when Brendan Nelson was the Minister for Education, I think he intervened in a couple of grants. I didn't intervene in any. Julia Bishop didn't intervene in any. I think Dan Tehan has intervened in one or two in the last 12 months, which is why, of course, you're asking me the question. And now Alan Tudge is there. I don't think Simon Birmingham intervened, but I could be corrected. So, look, it's not something that happens as a matter of routine. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So I would assume that will continue, and that the universities wouldn't expect there to be a ruler being run over every single grant application or successful grant recommendation from the department by the minister or their office. I think
I want to speak in one more.
Weather eye over them, but I think not with the view to, oh, we can't trust the universities.
Yeah.
More to, you know, what is the do we have a view about any of these? And obviously Dan Tehan decided he did have a view about one or two.
He clearly did, and we won't talk about milkshakes, but just very quickly, when do you expect the next federal election to be, and how tight a contest do you think it will eventuate, will turn out to be?
Well, John, I've always been of the view that the election would run, the term would run its full time. 3 years is so short anyway. Every time a Prime Minister calls an early election in Australia, it usually ends badly. The public don't like it. They can't work out why we're having one when the elections are only every 3 years anyway. State level, of course, it's 4, which is much better, but 3 is short. So why would you shorten it further? So I've always been of the view the election would be held sometime between March and May in 2022, and I don't think that has changed. I don't think it's changed because of the last couple of months in federal politics. I think those people who were breathlessly talking about an election this year, there's always reasons people would do that. I think the Labor people would do it because they don't want to change the leader, and they think if there's an election, the backbench won't be too bouncy. So I think the election will be at the time it's supposed to be, which is the second quarter of next year. I think every election's there to be won or lost. Anyone who thinks that an election is a lay down misere 12 months out from an election doesn't understand politics. The government doesn't have a majority on the floor of the House of Representatives, which seems to have become the kind of norm.
People forget that. People lose touch with the fact that this government is hanging on by the skin of its teeth at the moment, and
absolutely,
it never gets remarked upon.
I know, the Morrison government's been in majority much less than it's been in minority.
Yep.
After Scott replaced Malcolm in 2018, the government was in minority until the election.
And now you've got Craig Kelly and all this sort of stuff going on. And
right.
I mean, goodness knows, you can't possibly unravel it all.
No, so I don't think we can predict the outcome of the election. I think it will be hard fought and close, as they all are in Australia, which is one of the great things about our democracy. So hopefully the consumer gets the best possible product because no one's taking anything for granted. And I think, I'm looking forward to it. I love elections, and I love it even more that I'm not running for it. So I don't have to worry about getting re-elected.
Look, it's been wonderful to be able to pick your brains, and you are that very rarest of commodities, Christopher Pyne, a politician who has retained his humanity and his humour. And for that, we thank you and look forward to hearing much more from you, not just within the confines of a conference, but generally in public life throughout the course of what I hope is a long and fulfilling post-political life for you too. So thank you very, very much for your insights today. We really, really have appreciated it.
Well, that's very kind, John. Thank you very much. You never said anything nice about me like that when you were interviewing me on radio, I've got to say. So
I wonder why. No, we always enjoyed a banter, and we've enjoyed today. At least I have, and I hope you have too. So thank you very, very much.
Good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Christopher Pyne, the former Minister for Defence, Education, as you've heard, and as I've already just said, that rarest of things, a politician who retained his humanity. Now, our next session, in just a few moments, just minutes from now, we'll start our discussion, our panel discussion on cybersecurity at the ATN Solutions Summit. I remind you on Twitter, hashtag capital A, capital T, capital N Solutions, ATN Solutions Summit on Twitter if you want to have a parallel conversation there. See you again in a moment. And welcome back to the ATN Solutions Summit. Our first panel discussion for today, for the third day, is on cybersecurity, and it's front of mind for a whole lot of reasons for practically every entity, commercial or government. It doesn't matter what you do in this incredibly online world, it is front of mind, even for home businesses and micro businesses, small businesses, big ones, government enterprises. The threats are constant. So we are incredibly lucky today to be able to pick the brains of some of the leading experts, not just in Australia, but they take on leadership roles around the world as well. Leading our panel is Mr. Damien Manuel from Deakin University and Michelle Price from the AustCyber, the Australian Government Cybersecurity Growth Network, joins us, as does Professor Matt Warren from RMIT University, Professor of Cybersecurity. And thank you very much, Matt, Michelle and Damien. And as with all of our sessions, the full bios of the panelists are available on the website, and rather than spending precious time reciting them, I refer you to the website if you want to know more information about them. Damien, first of all, our lead panelist, thank you very much for your time. Take us through what you regard as the major threats and the major opportunities in this vital area.
Thanks, John. I think some of the major threats that we as a democratic society have is misinformation and manipulation of citizens in the country. Scams obviously attacking Australians, business email compromises, attacking SMEs and large corporates and organisations. So I think there's this sort of ever-present threat that's growing, particularly as cybersecurity becomes sort of the new sort of war platform, if you like, for hostile nations. And I think, some of the changes that we're going to see over time as we become more and more digitally connected and more digitally dependent is the disruption of services. And getting used to the fact that we're going to see more and more data breaches occur and the release of personal information, which may have consequences that impact people in a negative perspective. There was an instance where there was a dating website for people to date on that had their information released, and that sort of release of information resulted in people committing suicide. So I think we're really seeing this change of, just being a digital sort of disruption to more and kinetic impact to people's lives.
Privacy dead, though, isn't it? I mean, anyone who fondly holds on to quaint notions of personal privacy is just not caught up with what's happened, surely.
Correct. Yeah. And when you look at, platforms like Facebook and sort of, other similar platforms, a lot of consumers don't realize that they're the actual product. And so that's why those platforms are free. So you give away a lot of your rights in terms of the privacy of the information that you have, and where you browse, what things you like, who you communicate with. And all of that, what people don't realize, is actually quite vital information that can be used to construct or deconstruct, if you like, your psychology in terms of who you're going to vote for, your sexual preference, and all these things that we hold dear and sort of protect, we tend to sort of leak and give away.
How much of a false sense of safety and security would it be for us to approach an Australian federal election thinking that we're somehow immune from foreign interference, the likes of which we've seen in so many other Western democracies, particularly proven now in the United States?
Yes, we've definitely seen it in the United States. We've seen it with Brexit, foreign interference as well. I think we can, definitely expect foreign interference to occur during our election.
What type?
So I think we're likely to see influence from countries like China, definitely trying to push populists in one direction or another. Then you've got other countries that are fantastic at doing this, particularly in Europe. Russia is always trying to push back NATO and disrupt sort of countries that are aligned to NATO to cause civil unrest and then sort of roll in the tanks. I don't think we're likely to see that level, but we are going to see the level of disruption where, manipulation of social media will become a key aspect. You'll obviously see politicians being slammed for, different types of things that the population are not going to be happy about, but a lot of that might be fake. Particularly with sort of deep fakes being easy and able to be created by just about anybody these days.
So it's much more subtle, it's more underhand, is what you're saying. I kind of thought that Russia, China, trying to tackle the West economically hasn't worked all that well. Trying to tackle the West militarily, it's far too costly. But what you can do is use the Achilles heel of our democracy, our openness, to undermine and achieve what you want to, whether it's strategic or whether it's economic. you can do it much more subtly and with more nuance now than the blunt instruments of atomic weapons or whatever else it was.
100%. It's cheaper and faster to do it digitally on social media platforms, and really the only way to protect ourselves is for social media platforms to have some sort of either legislation or oversight by the government to ensure that they're not being manipulated or taken advantage of to swing sort of voters in one direction or another.
I'll come back to you shortly. Michelle, you're nodding in agreement, but you run a government agency. So how far can you go in agreeing with what Damien's told us?
Well, actually, I'm not a government agency, which is awesome. We're government funded, but not actually government. We're a non-profit. And our government funding is changing a little bit over the coming years. And so we're in a wonderful position where we can sit right in between everyone. And as we say very affectionately, we can call BS on everyone. And so we are a central source of trusted truth to the point about how we actually distill what is fake, what's not fake, what's being manipulated, what's not being manipulated, how we're being influenced, which has happened ever since humans became humans. We've all been influenced in one way or another. It's just how that then gets used to affect an outcome, happening at such great pace and scale through the digital world that's then, as Damien pointed out, very rightly so, having kinetic or physical impacts, which is why, Damien and Matthew and I and so many of us in this kind of ecosystem refer to our world now being cyber-physical. And so, I think that we need to keep in mind in all of this equation that, of course, nation states have the resources to move out ahead often of corporates and of communities. That's not the case anymore. We've already seen Cambridge Analytica demonstrate the fact that corporates actually do have the size and weight and scale of some even bigger than some countries. And of course, some of the technology platforms that we're now dealing with and the ways in which malicious actors use those platforms to affect their outcomes are bigger than some nation states. And we'll see the same kind of influences and jostling strategically being done by corporates just as much as we are seeing by nation states. So understanding where an individual's responsibilities and accountabilities lie in that, as much as governments with legislation and regulation, is really important. And of course, this can be so overwhelming for people, which is where I'll bring in and say it's wonderful that the ATN is running a session like this in the forum, because we get to kind of be a bit of a focal point in being able to give life to this notion that cybersecurity is as much an opportunity as it is about defending against the very darkness of society. And the way that our economies and democracies work, because it's such an amazing space where we do need collaboration, but that collaboration relies on trust, and trust is so easily messed with.
And indeed, if it is a point of attack, if it's recognised that eroding trust is actually a way of achieving other outcomes, it's not an end in itself. It's in your interest then, if you're a foreign actor wanting to disrupt the economy or disrupt the strategic interests of another country, to start off by pulling out one of the legs of the table effectively, and trust is probably the most important one. We've seen that. What I don't understand though is why Western democracies and governments have been so slow to recognise that and act against it.
I think it's a great observation, and I think all of us would agree with that. The wheels of government turn slowly is what we hear. Well, of course, we know actually that the bureaucracies that sit within some universities turn slower. There's a reflection point that we can have here, as well as an inflection point to say that the pace of this is unlike anything the world has ever experienced before. And trying to develop the right kinds of responses, as well as building in proactivity in that, is incredibly challenging, which is why in Australia, where we look to a government often in the first instance to solve some of these very complex problems, and the government's not really doing, an amazing job at it. They're not doing the job that we expect them to be doing. They're in this mess just as much as we are. And, again, I come back to collaboration. The age-old thing about how we in Australia love to throw a brick at government, we love to throw a brick at politicians. We also love to throw a brick at anything that just is a failure in our eyes. We need to put all of that aside, both in terms of our home culture, what we talk about around the barbecue, so to speak, but also actually how we do business, because government is an equal actor in all of this. Yes, they own some capability that no one else owns, But actually, much of the capability that's needed to tackle some of these challenges sits well outside of government. It's just that, of course, they hold the strings around policy, and then they influence the way that policy results in outcome, whether that's economic or otherwise. So, there's a whole range of, fundamental shifts that are going on right now, and all of us have been pretty slow to catch up, frankly speaking. It's just that we do look to government to do things first. In this case, we actually need to enable ourselves to be able to move quicker, because that trust piece absolutely is being challenged like there's no tomorrow.
I'll come back to you shortly. Matt, should we be looking to the industry that's amassing new fortunes by harnessing this commercial potential? I mean, we've got the richest people in the world are running businesses that didn't exist a generation ago. They just weren't even imagined back then. Should we be looking to them to put their own house in order, or is it up to government to do it?
I think there's a number of areas. One of the areas where the government's been very proactive, and that's where RMIT is leading a project on behalf of the sector, is a project funded by UFIT, the University Foreign Interference Task Force, about improving cybersecurity for the entire tertiary sector. And a key aspect of that is to have a trusted forum where conversations can occur between the different government entities and departments around cyber and university as a sector, but also then developing the actual capabilities and tools to improve security across the entire sector. And I think when we talk about universities, what we have to do is not just think of ourselves as separate entities or networks, but think of all the universities across the entire sector. And certainly, I think in terms of innovation and future technologies, universities are well positioned in terms of developing the solutions and technologies of the future. Many universities have a key focus on innovation, and certainly, the work that Michelle does with AusCyber is all about developing that next generation of cyber capability within Australia, which adds to Australia's cyber sovereign capability. So many universities, such as RMIT, we have our accelerators, we have our industry innovation centers with Amazon Web Services. Many other universities, have similar considerations, and what we're able to do is bring together researchers from across the university, people from computing, from maths, from business, from policy, to work on problems and solutions for the future. And the other thing that is often overlooked is the international aspects that Australian universities have, which give us quite a unique capability. So in terms of RMIT, we have researchers in RMIT Vietnam, for instance. We have a campus and operations in Europe, in Barcelona. So it means when we talk about cyber, we're able to look at it not just in an Australian context, but also, regionally and globally. And I think really, when we talk about universities, we talk about research, we talk about innovation, we really have to start to think of it, from a regional and global perspective. And really, this is where, universities, ATN members, can help to make that global contribution.
But let me press you on the funding model. I'm not sure. First of all, tell us, where does the funding for your centre specifically come from? What's the mix?
So again, in terms of the centre that we have at RMIT, but the same with most research centres, we're partially funded by the university. We're also then funded by research funding that comes from industry and government. So the same with all other research centres. It's a very sort of competitive process in terms of applying for research funding. Certainly in an Australian context, cybersecurity is considered a national research priority area. So there are a lot of either dedicated schemes or within the Australian Research Council, cybersecurity is considered, a priority area. So,
Right.
so there certainly are opportunities there for funding, as well as then opportunities for, international funding as well.
Let me start with you with this question, Matt, but I'll come to Damien and Michelle as well on it. If I want to drive a car on the road, I pay for the road as a user through my registration and petrol taxes, as well as my income taxes going to the government that builds the roads. If I want to use the health system, I pay income taxes and I also pay for health insurance or whatever other contribution I need to. If I want to go to a private school, I make a contribution for my kids' education at a private school, and so on and so forth. There is no parallel when it comes to this field of commerce. It's the most lucrative area of international business in the world. And it's essentially making no contribution to its own infrastructure. It's the classic example, is it not, of socializing the costs, making them paid for by the taxpayers, by the citizens, whilst privatizing the profits. Why is that not changing? Matt?
Well, certainly, in my experience, that there are changes. That we are, exploring different income models for cybersecurity courses. For instance, at RMIT, we offer, courses from VE up, to tertiary. So as well as private courses through our online delivery at RMIT Online. So from the course perspective, there's a number of models of delivery. In terms of engagement with industry, I actually think you are beginning to see changes around that. So certainly,
what like a fingernail clippings worth?
Well, again, certainly in terms of the innovation space, you're actually starting to see technologies being co-developed by universities. We see, through our cyber research funding schemes that have universities and startups working together.
Okay.
But again, yes, so certainly the challenge is that Australia faces is a lot of these global cyber companies, are based in North America, or based in Europe, or based in Israel. It's how to then get that sort of contribution from, into Australia. And certainly the example we have at RMIT is working with Amazon Web Services on the KIC lab, which is 5-year funding, where ACS is committing resources, committing human capability to actually help us as part of our activator to transfer ideas into actual solutions. But it is a much bigger question, this issue about developing a global cyber ecosystem and how to develop that relationship between industries and universities. And I know Michelle has a lot to say about this and write about this. Yes.
So let's throw it to you, Michelle. Am I being too harsh on this extraordinarily powerful industry that's emerged in the blink of an eye?
Well, the blink of an eye is actually true, but it's also not. It is very powerful, but what has shifted in the last 5 or so years is greater understanding in the kind of more retail environment, if we think about the more consumer environment, that it's really, really important to understand what cybersecurity is. Up until the last 5 years, there's been almost no understanding in the broader economy or community around what this is and why it's important. Why do we need to care about it? Why do we need to be investing in it? And why do we need to collaborate around it? And so that means that these large technology companies have been able to develop deep capability and own the market, and therefore control how these technologies then get applied in real life. I think that, absolutely, Matt points to the fact that it is shifting. It's shifting for a whole range of reasons. The transaction costs here are not recognised, and that's because cybersecurity today is actually the result of actually 25 years worth of deep tech research and commercialisation. And Australia has actually contributed a significant amount to that global capability that is now cybersecurity. There's actually 26 different types of cyber capabilities from a technology standpoint, and then there's a huge number of services that go on around that. But from a technology development point of view, where we're at today is not the result of a bunch of, teenage boys growing up in the basement, the sort of, Mike Cannon-Brookes and Scott Farquhar equivalent in cybersecurity, and that's even a bit unfair for them because there's been a lot of deep tech that sits behind these things that have taken a long time to develop to the point where you can have scalable, commercialized outcomes from that research. And so, the ATN and the Group of 8 have a huge amount of contribution that they've made that's not being recognised in the today kind of commercial context and what that looks like going forward. So, as much as we're only, sort of 5 years old as an industry, there's been a lot that's come before that.
Let's zero down on the specific issue of paying for some of the infrastructure, and the parallels I was giving before were about, I can't think of another example where the users are required to pay for the people who then go and make mega profits. How do we tax or levy or get a contribution, and a fair contribution, out of the people, the leviathans now that seem to control everything? Is there any prospect of it, apart from the fact that let's not get distracted by tax havens and the like, but is there any prospect, or will we just have to wear it?
I think there is a prospect, but it's a completely new field of econometrics in my view. So because there's so much intangible to the tangible around this space, it's looking at it less at the micro level and seeing what the individual needs to contribute versus what the the corporate might contribute, and much more about how we shift the cost model in favour of those who work on the light side of the equation rather than the dark side. So a lot of this big money that's being made out of cybersecurity globally at the moment is actually in response to the fact that those who are doing the best in this whole equation are the malicious cyber actors. They own us in so many different ways. And so what we do need to do from an econometrics point of view is make the transaction cost higher for the malicious actor to do business and much lower for the individual, the SME, the corporate, the government agency to be able to act safely in a trusted world of cyber physical. So, I mean, it's a very different construct and it spins people's heads out, but that's where we need to focus this effort.
All right, and just finally, before I do go to Damien, Matt said, oh, well, we need a global response, to which my heart sinks. If you're waiting for a global response, it'll never happen. Surely a country somewhere, and hopefully one that's got some clout, has to act and then invite others to join with it.
There's lots of efforts going on around that right now. And because of the way that technology obviously operates, it doesn't care about boundaries or borders or laws or any of these kinds of things in the sense of how they can be applied, because it's so highly contextual. So we are doing a heck of a lot in Australia to focus now less about the applied nature of cyber globally. We leave that to groups like this to do that, as well as policymakers. But in the everyday sense of the everyday Australian, there's a heck of a lot now about joining up local to regional to national, so that we have a much more sort of ecosystem approach on how we can tackle the complexity, but take advantage of the huge amounts of money, but also other forms of value that can be made out of this space. And leave the kind of international dynamics in this next phase of maturity around cybersecurity to those who have laid the groundwork to then shape and influence what good behaviour is and what bad behaviour is. And we're starting to see that around, the US over the past 5 years, naming and shaming, and then other allies coming in behind, which Australia's been very good at doing. And equally looking at a systematic view like Estonia has done. And I know both Matt and Damien have done work in Estonia at a research level, around how you also go from the bottom up in terms of the systems that we use for technology to sit on top of, like how we digitise our identities and do that in a trusted and secure way, so that all citizens and residents and tourists are using the same system to be able to identify where we're up to, if they need healthcare, if they're here for education, if they're here for work, how you transition through all of those things.
All right, Damien, let me throw this to you, and thank you, Michelle, that was great. What do you make of some of the discussion that Matt and and Michelle have been having on this particular topic. Before we move on, I've got some other issues, particularly about universities, that we need to get to, but I want to put a ribbon around this first.
No worries. I think it's a multi-speed sort of economy kind of issue thing, which is both at a local level in Australia, but also at a global level. I think some of the changes and complaints that you saw from Google and Facebook, where the current government was trying to get media rights for certain agencies to, to replay, if you like, media on their platforms, was kind of the first salvo fight across the bow. And I think we're going to start to see a bit more of a trend of governments actually looking for ways to reap more revenue. And so they will become a bit more hostile, if you like, towards sort of these large conglomerate organizations that really don't have any sort of geographic boundaries. And I think part of the problem is, this technology has grown up very quickly, where laws, policy, regulation hasn't caught up to it to the same level. And also the human side of things hasn't caught up as well. If I look at it in a local country perspective, if a utility provider rings you and says, John, I need you to authenticate who you are, so I make sure that I'm talking to you, tell me your date of birth and tell me your street address or something like that, there's no way really for us to work out a way to authenticate one, that is really the utility provider and that it's really you on the other end of the phone. And there's all these complexities that we're yet to sort of deal with, both at local government level, sort of state level, and also in the commercial space, both in Australia and internationally.
In my non-working life, I play with old cars, and that's become a passion for me. And I often use the parallel when I'm trying to explain this to people who don't get it. I say, well, look, when Daimler and Benz combined the horseless carriage and the internal combustion engine, came up with a self-propelling vehicle for the first time in the 1890s. It took another 10 years before a system of rules and regulations, insurance licenses were developed. And we're at the same stage now. This is in its infancy and we're struggling to catch up. But I've got to move the discussion onto other things. And the three of you, I'm sure, want to contribute on this issue in particular, which is, are there capacity constraints? Are we here in Australia, are we training the next generation of experts? Have we got the ability to build what we need for ourselves, or are we going to, as we have with engineering, as we have with so many other areas of the economy, are we going to be dependent on finding people overseas to come and solve our own problems for us? So let's start with that, Damien, with you.
So I think, as we ramp up our digital dependency, we're going to struggle to find the right types of people, because one of the key things to think about cyber is it's not just all technology. There are aspects of cyber which are around people, aspects around policy, law and reforms and things like that. And, if I look at what the government did at the moment with, humanities subjects and, making it harder for people to do humanities subjects because they felt that wasn't a growth area, that's a huge disservice to cybersecurity, because a lot of great people that come from a policy area, a regulation area to do with cyber, have a humanities background. So I think we have to be very careful when, the government choosing winners and losers in terms of courses, because cyber is an area that draws on all those skill sets and all those areas. It's not a one size fits all. And I think the other competing aspect that you have within universities is often the course is structured and owned, if you like, by a particular area of the university, whether it's a school of IT, whether it's a school of business or another area, as opposed to something that is holistic across a large segment of the university that takes into account engineering, business processes, IT processes, psychology, criminology and all those sort of areas. And then that way you get more of a holistic sort of outcome in terms of skills at the end. And I think that's a challenge that a lot of universities are struggling with. You're either in the technology camp or you're in the business camp, and it's how you get that blend so that way you get that balanced skill set out. I think that's going to be the challenge that we'll see.
All right, and I'll come to Michelle and Matt in this as well, but still with you for a moment longer. Are we harnessing the opportunities available in a diverse community? For instance, it's still very much a pale, stale male area, dare I suggest it, and I'm sure Michelle will want to join in.
100%. And in the last 3 years, we've only moved from 12% female participation in that space to about 17%, and it's still not good enough. A lot of things.
Is it just about STEM and STEAM, or is it much more than that? Is it more subtle than that?
I think it's much more than that, because it's about sort of language, it's about the role, it's how it's positioned. You know, a lot of people think cybersecurity is all around penetration testing and attacking and defending and things like that. It's actually a lot more than that. And, you know, that language of attacking and defending doesn't appeal to everybody. You know, some people are more attuned to do consultancy work. Some are more attuned to do risk management aspects. Some are more attuned to do architecture, design. And we don't really sort of promote cybersecurity enough in all those sort of other job areas. Michelle?
Obviously, I get asked this question all the time. It's kind of.
Oh, sorry, then forget it. We'll move on.
No. But I think that it's important to say that exactly that. And Damien and Matthew are great bastions of the true need for what actual diversity is in this field. And it's the same for all of the STEM fields. It's actually all the same for the humanities. And that is, we do need diversity of gender. We need diversity of ethnicity. And that's really challenging for cybersecurity because of the security clearance pace on the attack and defend end of the spectrum. And that's, you know, not just about the, you know, sort of the color of your skin. There's a whole range of things that go into that are really dealing with legacy issues from World War II, frankly speaking. But then there's also the piece around having diversity of background in, you know, sort of just your life experience. And to kind of spin off what Damien was saying just before, you know, one of the most amazing cybersecurity technical experts I've ever had the privilege of working with, which happened to be in the Australian government, was a PhD in music. And when I say this, tell this story, particularly in universities, like this kind of quizzical look comes across the face. Why would someone with a PhD in music end up in cybersecurity, particularly at the very pointy end of the equation? Music is pattern analysis. Music is also anticipating an emotional response. Of course, people with PhDs in music should be in cybersecurity. So when you say that, it's very obvious. But until you say it, it's not. And it's the same for how we attract and retain people of different genders. You know, sort of, we also need a huge amount of injection of First Nations people into this space, like all of the STEM fields. But the good news in this is that everyone in our sector is very laser sharp focused on this now. And we absolutely, because we're so competitive as an industry, in terms of, you know, needing to win out against the bad guys, we're actually all collaborating and steering the ship in a direction that says, let cybersecurity be the industry that takes all of the bullets on how to do it wrong so that we can get it right as a nation. Because actually we've already learned some lessons in cybersecurity on how to really truly move the needle. And in that space, you know, with Damien saying that we've gone from, you know, sort of 11% to 17%. Before COVID, we were actually sitting at 28%. We've gone backwards in the number of women that have been retained in cybersecurity. And again, that's a use case that can be discussed across all technology fields. It's really, really important to be focusing on this because of the lag effect in pipeline.
Does it not persuade the decision makers and the leaders, though, that the work of, whether you're looking at Thomas Piketty, the French economist, who shows that economies that are more dispersed and diverse are also more prosperous, or the work of Dean Patch at Leadership Matters, who's analysed companies and shown that the more diverse the leadership of a company is, the more profitable it is. I mean, there's countless studies that have shown that if you're narrow casting, you're less likely to succeed, to be profitable. I mean, you can't survive on the old boys network in the modern economy. Is that penny not dropped?
It has dropped, but I think what's missed in all of these discussions, and I get kind of on my high horse about this, the reason why we haven't cracked the nut on it, frankly speaking, is because there's this piece called culture, but it's not just the culture of people relating to each other, it's also the culture of how we do business. You know, the business of doing business. That culture has not shifted in Australia writ large for many, many years.
Why?
Well, it's because I think we haven't held ourselves to account. And that's why a former military leader is now so famous for saying, the standard you walk past is the standard that you accept. Great. Well, where's the accountability when you do walk past it? Because there's so much nuance in why somebody might walk past it. So, you know, this is so complex. It's as complex as what cybersecurity is, frankly, complex in so many different ways, which is why one organisation like a government can't solve it alone. and also why one form of leadership, like an advertising campaign around consent, can't do it alone. And yes, absolutely, the behaviours around consent feeds right up into how we encourage and retain the right kinds of mix of leaders in different organisations, different sectors in the country.
So many of our panel discussions in now the third day have come down to leadership and changing culture. It's extraordinary how unified a theme it is through everything else. Thank you. I'll try and come back to you if we have time. Matt, just on those same issues.
Well, again, agreeing with Damien and Michelle's point, I think that there's two aspects that haven't been mentioned. One is when we talk about a cybersecurity workforce, we're actually talking about it from a sovereign capability, that Australia needs to be able to produce cybersecurity professionals for now, but also in the future to deal with the growing cyber demands in terms of a workforce from government and industry. And this is why, for instance, Michelle Price with our cyber's been so key in developing a national cybersecurity curriculum for TAFE. In terms of generating TAFE graduates with cybersecurity expertise to help fill the gap. I think a point that has been touched upon, that has, I think, dramatic effect has been the impact on COVID, is the fact that COVID has stopped all skilled migration into Australia. And certainly historically how Australia has dealt with skills and historically is being able to bring skilled migrants into Australia to help contribute to those professions. And the fact that it has been stopped and it will be stopped for the foreseeable future will have an impact for Australia now, but also into the future, that when things do return to normal, that there is going to be this skills vacuum. And what you do see in industry is, a lot of poaching from one industry into the other in terms of trying to poach staff with higher wages. You see the situation where the industry is only looking for, people to start at entry level, with 3 to 5 years experience and a whole suite of cybersecurity certifications, which then, poses that challenge of how to pipeline students from their courses into industry. So I think that there's also some other things we need to talk about. And one of those conversations is with the cybersecurity industry in terms of, allowing those pipeline of our graduates from our universities into industry. And again, in the UK, they have, a cyber apprentice model run at a national level to help facilitate that. And maybe some of the conversations, have to be about, how government can help sort of facilitate those problems that are currently in existence.
It's kind of weird. Can you explain this to me? And I'll go backwards through the panel and stay with you for the moment, Matt. There's this thriving gaming culture, and that's highly profitable and lucrative, but can't we get some leverage? You're saying you need apprenticeships, cyber apprenticeships. There's a whole coterie of tech-savvy kids there immersed in gaming culture. Can't the cybersecurity needs of the nation be met by tapping in to gaming culture?
And I think it's certainly been sort of mentioned before, is actually cybersecurity is this very broad area. That there's the technical aspects, there's the organization, there's the human. And certainly, it'd be great to be able to transfer some of those gaming technical skills in terms of, a cyber perspective. And that may be one way to help with part of the problem, but it is such a large problem, that there's such a wide suite of roles that are needed, not just now, into the future. So I think certainly that there could be short-term, activities, but when we talk about the longer term into developing, Australia's sovereign capability, to be honest, it needs to start at primary school. We need to message cybersecurity as being a career path, when people are at primary schools and aware of it. So that's where the pipeline can come from, and that takes time.
All right, Damien, to you.
Around addressing the need of culture, or
overcoming the capacity constraints and this brainwave I just had while we were talking of tapping into gaming culture in order to recruit people who might want to use that, to leverage that into a career in cybersecurity.
I think the big problem that we all have to deal with is industry is also lazy. And industry is lazy in the sense that they're time poor, they've got pressures, they're trying to make a profit, they're doing more with less staff. And it's easier to poach somebody from another organization who's a known quantity, who's already working in the field. And it's that laziness of, well, I'll take a graduate from a university, or I'll get some kids that are into gaming and we'll bring them in as interns and expose them, because that requires needing somebody to mentor, somebody to coach them, and all those sort of aspects. But I guess what they don't realize is the cost of doing that. They're actually going to save a lot of money long term and build loyalty, rather than sort of, that lazy aspect of poaching a known quantity from another organization. So I think that needs to be considered by industry, that, while it might look more expensive initially on the books because it requires more labor intensive, somebody who's already got an existing job, who's time poor and time pressured to set aside time to mentor these sort of new people into the organization, it will pay dividends in the long run. And then I wanted to touch on sort of the aspect that, Michelle raised around culture. And I've seen culture, particularly in the vendor space, so cybersecurity vendors, have been extremely poor. Not all of them, but it has been, the equivalent of Wolf of Wall Street type of activities of, taking their customers to strip clubs and taking photos so that they're, blackmailed to signing agreements, a culture of a bit of the boys club. And all of that type of thing really pushes people away from cybersecurity and becoming a cybersecurity individual in sort of the vendor community. And that's something that, is starting to shift slowly. I remember back in 2016 being at a senior executive meeting, and two major executives started talking about the, which prostitutes in which countries had the best SLAs. And, this is the kind of...
Sorry, the best what?
The best service level agreements. And this is the kind of thing that needs to kind of be weeded out. And it's exactly like Michelle said, if you stand by and see that and don't say anything, you're kind of adding and contributing to it. So I think there is a huge sort of culture piece that needs to sort of change and improve, particularly in that space.
So you're telling us that your pocket of this industry needs its own Me Too movement?
It does. Yep.
It's
Where's it going to come from? Michelle, go ahead.
It's actually been going on. It's just that we have a slightly more introverted culture within this industry than some of the other areas of technology. Concurrent areas alongside cybersecurity experience the same thing. But I think we are coming into a time, because of things that are far external to cybersecurity, like what's happened in Parliament House in Canberra and things like that, that is making it easier. I say that hesitantly, easier and perhaps safer for some of the things to be sort of surfaced and exposed, because unfortunately, a bit like what happened in Silicon Valley a number of years ago with Me Too, some of the, shall I say, atrocities that have happened and continue to happen in this country today in industries like cybersecurity, unfortunately are far worse than what we're seeing playing out in the media at the moment in other fields. So there's still a lot of an emotional journey that we have to go on, not just in our industry, but in other technology industries. And I'm just hoping that when we look at this screen, we've still got a lot of working life left in us. I hope that we do tackle these things very soon, because when we look at the convergence that's coming towards us, and the convergence that I offer all the time is cybersecurity, true AI, and quantum. We need to get over this cultural stuff super fast. We really do. To be able to set ourselves up for the kind of success that we're expecting from all of this investment that's been going on in technology. But to circle back to your original question there, John, yes, we do have the capacity here in this country. In fact, we've got the capacity to do it without very much imported labour. And that's not just in terms of what we've got available to us at the moment, but also in pipeline. We've got the smarts, we've got the frameworks, we've also got the money. In my view, the money's being allocated in the wrong places, and we've made the money competitive again. It should be collaborative, and we should be rewarding where people are collaborating together to get scale, not fragment. And that's what we see all the time around the university sector, but it's actually also in the vet sector, and it's everywhere else in the economy.
So just final question to each of you. If the decisions are being made by politicians, most of whom struggle to work out how to send an email and have someone else to do a Google search for them if they need to know anything, what hope is there of the sort of profound reform that you're all furiously agreeing we need? Michelle? Yeah,
I think that I think it is a little bit of divide and conquer at the same time as creating this, continuing to have the safe spaces for politicians to learn. And my experience,
just suddenly lost your audio. Go again.
I work with a lot of them very closely, both at the federal level and the state level, and now increasingly at the local level as well. There's a huge amount of interest. There really genuinely is. There's of course the cynics and there's the diehards anti-technologists in there, but overwhelming majority of politicians and policymakers really want to get on top of this. But they are so terrified that if they step left or right by a millimetre and get it wrong, they're going to have not just one brick, but an entire house worth of bricks thrown at them, and they'll never rear their head up again. So these safe spaces to be able to learn and share and grow together. And I know that sounds kind of a bit naff, but it's actually where we're at when it comes to security issues.
All right, Matt, final comment?
I think it's Michelle said, you know, we are living the new cyber normal, and I think government is realizing that they have to adapt and change. And certainly, you know, we are seeing a new generation of politicians starting to appear who actually do understand cyber and understand, you know, the impact around technology. So certainly there will be change, but as was mentioned before, change takes time.
All right. And Damien, where do you think the change is going to come from then, just finally?
So I think, you know, you've got someone like Tim Watts, who's the Shadow Minister for Cybersecurity. You know, he's, I think, the first one that I know of that went to cyber conferences in Vegas, DEF CON and some of the others. And I think the media also has a large part to play because, you know, if I think back to Barnaby Joyce and his struggle to explain metadata, the media really got caught up in that, but it wasn't the point. The point that the media should have really been talking about is how metadata can be used, how it can be used to track individuals, identify individuals. But that bit was completely missed because everybody was focused on really dumping on Barnaby Joyce because he couldn't explain metadata. So I think, you know, creating that safe space, but also the media bearing some responsibility to focus on not the inability of somebody to not be able to explain something, but more, you know, the consequence or the you know, impact of particular legislations or changes that are needed.
Well, the big risks are that we reinvent the wheel, which doesn't need to be done either, or alternatively, that we have policy dictated to us by those who are supposed to be held accountable by it. And we're seeing that in some other areas, particularly, for instance, with some of the environmental decision-making, which is dictated by mining interests and some of the people who are, you know, feeling under threat. And we're also seeing it with the media, where in particular, you know, some of the big media giants whose empires are eroding in front of their eyes are trying to dictate policy in order to hold on there too. Look, it's absolutely fascinating. The three of you, you've taught us a lot, including I now know what an SLA is, and thanks very much for that too, Damien. Matt, Michelle, Damien, thank you. Our next session starts shortly at 1:30 East Coast time, and it's been pointed out to me that Queensland is on the East Coast, but okay, Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra time, 1:30. We'll reassemble, excuse me. Collaboration across borders is our topic at 1:30. The conversation continues on Twitter, hashtag ATN Solutions Summit, all caps ATN Solutions Summit on Twitter if you want to have a chat with each other there. And of course, also the Chief Defence Scientist joins us for our final session later this afternoon as well. But just for now, time to go and grab something to eat or a cup of tea or coffee. Look forward to seeing you 1:30 Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra time. Thanks.
cybersecurity is growing every single day because we're growing as a world. We're having a lot of data online, and where is that data going to? Who can access that?
What are the latest threats? What are the latest scams, and what can I do to help protect them?
At Deakin, we don't just teach students how to hack a system or pen testing. We also teach students about how do we control and manage information within organisations, and what are the safeguards and risk management that we need to put around that, whether it be from small to medium enterprises, mid-level organisations, or even right up to government and large corporate entities.
The facilities for cybersecurity students at Burwood are really great. So if you've got your own building where a lot of the IT or the STEM people can go, they offered a lot of the programs and the IT equipment that you needed to be able to complete your degree. So the practical experiences that are available to Deakin students range from Deakin helping you find vacation programs, placing you in industry-based learning programs, which helps you build up your network, but also builds up your skill set, including your soft skills, which is very important to the companies and the industry for a further experience.
For the first 2 years I was studying at the Burwood campus, but now I'm studying on the Cloud campus due to getting a role through my internship that I did through Deakin. My project is an app which will help other students collaborate with each other. It'll help Cloud students feel less disconnected from the on-campus students.
Myself personally, I'm a penetration tester at Deloitte, and this is a very technical role, but cybersecurity is not just about technical. So if you're not technical, that's fine. You can go into things about policy, governance. There's a lot of privacy work out there, but in addition to this, there's things like security architecture, and that's a really, really growing field. You can do anything you'd like. You just got to find exactly what your passion is and where your drive is in cybersecurity.
Capstone Discovery Lab that we've established in the School of IT at Deakin is really the foundation of where students do their final year capstone program. So the Discovery Lab really allows us to give students a platform to work together in teams, ideate solutions to problems that they come across, and then try to prototype and create minimum viable products, and then move those minimum viable products through to a solution that can actually help real businesses.
So the impact that cyber graduates will have on our future is super diverse, and it includes stuff like the health industry, like the automotive industry. As part of my course, I did a bit of criminology, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
So if you're thinking about studying cybersecurity at Deakin, just go for it. I came in and I didn't really know much about programming, and look where I am now. So if you've got a passion for it and you've got the ability to learn and you're willing to learn, study. Study and you be the best person you can be in that degree, and you'll get wherever you want to be. Cybersecurity is growing every single day because we're growing as a world. We're having a lot of data online, and where is that data going to? Who can access that?
What are the latest threats? What are the latest scams, and what can I do to help protect them?
At Deakin, we don't just teach students how to hack a system or pen testing. We also teach students about how do we control and manage information within organisations.
Cybersecurity is growing every single day because we're growing as a world. We're having a lot of data online, and where is that data going to? Who can access that?
What are the latest threats? What are the latest scams, and what can I do to help protect them?
At Deakin, we don't just teach students how to hack a system or pen testing. We also teach students about how do we control and manage information within organisations, and what are the safeguards and risk management that we need to put around that, whether it be from small to medium enterprises, mid-level organisations, or even right up to government and large corporate entities.
The facilities for cybersecurity students at Burwood are really great. So if you've got your own building where a lot of the IT or the STEM people can go, they offered a lot of the programs and the IT equipment that you needed to be able to complete your degree. So the practical experiences that are available to Deakin students range from Deakin helping you find vacation programs, placing you in industry-based learning programs, which helps you build up your network, but also builds up your skill set, including your soft skills, which is very important to the companies and the industry for a further experience.
For the first 2 years I was studying at the Burwood campus, but now I'm studying on the cloud campus due to getting a role through my internship that I did through Deakin. My project is an app which will help other students collaborate with each other. It'll help cloud students feel less disconnected from the on-campus students.
Myself personally, I'm a penetration tester at Deloitte, and this is a very technical role, but cybersecurity is not just about technical. So if you're not technical, that's fine. You can go into things about policy, governance. There's a lot of privacy work out there, but in addition to this, there's things like security architecture, and that's a really, really growing field. You can do anything you'd like. You just got to find exactly what your passion is and where your drive is in cybersecurity.
Capstone Discovery Lab that we've established in the School of IT at Deakin is really the foundation of where students do their final year capstone program. So the Discovery Lab really allows us to give students a platform to work together in teams, ideate solutions to problems that they come across, and then try to prototype and create minimum viable products, and then move those minimum viable products through to a solution that can actually help real businesses.
So the impact that cyber graduates will have on our future is super diverse, and it includes stuff like the health industry, like the automotive industry. As part of my course, I did a bit of criminology, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
So if you're thinking about studying cybersecurity at Deakin, just go for it. I came in and I didn't really know much about programming, and look where I am now. So if you've got a passion for it and you've got the ability to learn and you're willing to learn, study. Study, and you be the best person you can be in that degree, and you'll get wherever you want to be.
good afternoon and welcome back everybody for our final panel discussion, but not our final session, just the final panel discussion for the ATN Solutions Summit. I remind you on Twitter, it's at hashtag all caps ATN, hashtag ATN Solutions Summit, and you can join in the parallel conversation there. And there's lots, I'm sure, that people want to say. Our final panel discussion today, and I remind you that the bios of all of our panelists are on the website, and we won't spend precious conference time reciting everybody's extraordinary credentials. But our final panel today is about collaboration, and it's been a recurring theme. Leadership and collaboration have been the recurring themes as we talk not just about technology, but about the culture of technology all through the course of these 3 fascinating days. Now, our lead panelist is a poet, philosopher and historian. Marnie Hughes-Warrington is from University of South Australia. We're joined also by Sarah Pearce from Csiro, Murray Height from HiQ and Tim Jones from Hyperfire. Thank you all for joining us. Marnie, you've got a piece in the Australian today, an opinion piece in the Murdoch media, for which we don't really, we don't hold you to account for that particular thing, but it is the national broadsheet. Makes an incredibly valuable contribution to the Australian cultural debate. So take us through the main points you make there about openness and transparency for the Academy.
Look, John, we want to communicate with everybody, so all outlets are open to us to communicate. And the critical message is that universities are partnerships. We thrive in combination with the communities and the businesses that we serve. We really want Australia to be known as the place of the future in terms of the world. And the way to do that is to advance the really constructive partnerships that we have that work within the institutions, but also, of course, stewarding a better future for Australia economically and socially. So the key point is we're open for business, and we're seeking to really drive the changes, social and economic changes that Australia really wants to see. Okay,
it's easy to say. How hard is it to do it?
Look, it's more or less hard, but I think we've been practicing it for decades now, which is that you work in partnership with society groups, with industries, with firms. You work together in education. You decide to work out how to ensure that your graduates are job ready. You work on curriculum. You work on research. You don't cleave things off into neat containers. And you do that over decades and you get better and better and better at it. So we're getting better and better at it. And we expect that Australia's well-regarded higher education system will get better and better at it.
But the funding base for that better and better is getting smaller and smaller. And when we've just seen in the last 12 months, for instance, a significant increase in the entry price to study the humanities in a deliberate effort to try and move the dial in the market, is that a step forward or back?
Look, I understand the intent. I'm a humanities graduate and people may associate what I've done with not being job ready, and I'm here to disabuse that and say that a broad range of backgrounds is necessary for Australia's economy. I understand the intent behind it, which is that we really want to transform the economy and think about the skill sets that we need for the future. So we're behind that, but we do need a sustainable funding base and stability of policy settings in order to be able to do that. It's too important to keep shifting things around and expect people to kind of fill in the gaps, particularly when you're trying to support things like startups and you're trying to help firms to regenerate and grow. Changing the chairs around makes it really, really difficult for them to achieve the gains that they're seeking.
Okay, but it seems that it's in the minds of the policymakers that's more important to be able to read a balance sheet than it is to be able to read Chaucer.
Look, people in STEM also read Chaucer as well, John, you know that too. Not just about balance sheets, they're looking for critical skills, they're looking for an ability to put data together. You know, we're looking for key areas such as cybersecurity. We're wanting to make sure that we've got data analysts sufficient across the board. My sense is the need is so broad and so deep, we're going to need all of our disciplines. So to give you an example, we've got an amazingly strong creative group of disciplines here at UniSA, and I cannot imagine the transformations, economic transformations that we're seeking happening without those groups bringing design thinking to the kinds of innovations that we're wanting to achieve.
Aren't we going backwards on international measures of our educational outcomes though, secondary and tertiary?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. The world's shifted a little way, John, in thinking about those things and saying, okay, there's particular measures that are capturing things. But, you know, design-driven change, design-driven economies are a little difficult to capture in some of the standard testing. So we have to also be a little brave and commit to the kinds of thinking that might come off page and require us to invest in human capability in, you know, broader ways of thinking.
We teach people to think critically and we teach students to challenge. there are other models that do the precise opposite. They teach obedience, and they in fact value doing what you're told much more highly than thinking independently. Is that a creative tension, or is it a trap?
Sometimes we're obedient and sometimes we're not. You and I press the button to cross the road. We know when to cross the road and when not to cross the road. And sometimes we're argumentative. But let me say this to you, John. Australia's education system is internationally well regarded. People are desirous of education at all levels across the globe, and the provision for that education is uneven. And people across the world, their families want their children to come to Australia because of its system being so well regarded. So that argumentativeness that we might associate with Australia is actually seen as a desirable thing. And we're seeing more and more economies look to us and say, actually, that way of thinking, challenging, engaging, that's exactly the kind of thinking that we need. And the resilience that goes with that, that's pretty critical for global transformation.
All right, I'll get to Sarah, Murray and Tim in just a moment. They've all got stories to tell as well, but just one last one for you. You're a Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research Enterprise. I don't know how common that is, but you don't usually see research and enterprise together. So why is that, and what does it do?
Look, I absolutely love the combination of my titles. I like people to think about my work traversing right from discovery. So the moment where somebody has a great idea pop in their mind through to translation and commercialization. And we need to think of those things as actually working in systems that support people from that point to that point. And having overarching view of that is pretty critical. It's no secret as well, John, that I have been a Deputy Vice-Chancellor academic. I actually see education as a critical part of this too. So UniSA, we are all about pulling the fences down and supporting startups to scale-ups, to grow to firms, and supporting graduates to go out and work in those firms as well. So we're pulling down fences rather than constructing silos and making it difficult for people to achieve their innovations.
Okay, I'll come back to you shortly. Murray, tell me the story of Haiku, because it's a remarkable tale that starts out with a bit of bushwalking.
Indeed, and Haiku's beginnings actually started in Switzerland, but from a hike with smelly clothes and thinking about how technology can prevent clothing from smelling, we actually grew as a spin-off from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology into a company that specializes in providing innovation to the global textile market. So some of our technologies focus on providing functionality like cooling, warming, antimicrobial, antiviral, water repellency type effects to the global sportswear, outdoor wear, and through to textiles generally across the globe. These days we have...
We can't see what you're wearing, but I presume you model this stuff every day in your daily life?
I try and test it out as much as I can, John.
That's right, okay, keep going.
But these days we actually have more than 150 people globally across 10 sites. And here in Australia, we have a presence on campus at Deakin University in Warm Ponds as part of the Manufutures precinct.
And how does that tie in then, the enterprise and the academic research? Explain to us how those are tied together.
One of the key things that we try and do in terms of how we innovate is to try and explore very early stage ideas. And early stage ideas inherently have a lot of uncertainty and risk associated with them. So part of the value that we see in collaborating very actively with researchers within universities is there's an enormous capacity to test and explore and try to find whether a certain path forward on an idea is viable. So being very close to the researchers and on campus aids a lot of very close dialogue and quite agile problem solving together to try and see if there's a path forward for those ideas.
Couldn't you achieve it any other way? Do you need to be so closely tied in to a tertiary education facility?
I think it comes down to how do you access quite unique skills and very specialized infrastructure to really explore and understand new concepts in technology. And working with universities, you have access to quite a diverse range of perspectives, skills, expertise, combined with a lot of infrastructure that's very specialized, particularly in the materials space that we work in. So bringing ideas and concepts to university partners to talk to and engage with to see if it's possible, we find that helps to speed up the process. And it also keeps a focus very much on the technical nature of the problem you're trying to solve and reduce the uncertainty associated with that.
So is it about the aha moment, that serendipitous that was described by one of our panelists yesterday, that completely unexpected serendipitous moment where two apparently disconnected paths can cross?
I think that's absolutely a key part of the value of collaborating with very close dialogue, because even though there might be an initial starting point for a project and an idea, what we often find is in the process of discussing that and exploring it, you actually unearth a new idea. And that's the aha moment that you then go on to explore and drive into projects and products from there.
All
so
right,
that dialogue's important.
All right, I'll come back to you shortly, and we'll get to Tim over in the West in a moment too. Sarah, the CSIRO is one of the most misunderstood and underutilised organisations in Australia, and a lot of people don't understand its full potential. So take us through where CSIRO fits into this jigsaw puzzle, please.
Yeah, thanks, John. Very happy to talk about that. Look, I'm going to talk quite a bit today, if I get the chance, about our missions programme, because this session is about collaboration. And so fundamentally, what we are doing is trying to refocus the organisation to meet what are Australia's kind of key challenges. And we've got a set of 12 missions, which are in various stages of kind of being developed. But the core point is that they are all completely collaborative. So we're working towards setting up multidisciplinary, mission-based ecosystems that work across industry, across the research sector, and with government, both nationally and internationally, to try and address some of those, enormous challenges. And I think we saw through the last year or so with COVID, how, when we do have a challenge and when we really focus and when we work together, what we can achieve. And so we're trying to encourage the ecosystem to think a little bit in that sort of way. A good example is our mission on ending plastic waste. So we're working to completely reinvent, really, the waste cycle in Australia. But of course, there are international countries who want to do the same thing. So domestically, we're working with research, government and industry, but also we're working with India and Indonesia and China to say how together can we really address some of these critical issues.
Okay, run through just the 12, just name them so we know where they are, and don't kind of expand and dwell on them. Just tell us what the 12 are, please.
I will just go through to my list of the 12. Which I have down here, but they're based around kind of 6 sort of core challenges that we saw for Australia around things like addressing our national security, resilient environments, health, climate change, sustainability, disease, and food and water. So the full list of missions is around antibiotic resistance, safeguarding water resources, helping Australia measure and mitigate climate risk, transforming mineral commodities into higher value products, reducing the impact of drought on Australian communities, changing the way we make, use, recycle and dispose of plastics. So we've already mentioned that one. Growing Australia's protein industry, building a new clean hydrogen industry, increasing our capacity to address emerging infectious diseases, growing SMEs through better access to R&D, low emissions resources for the agriculture industry, and growing agri-food exports. So it's a long list, right? There's 12, yep. But I think it touches on, hopefully, many of the areas that we see as challenges for Australia. But really core to that is it's not about CSIRO doing it on its own, of course.
No.
We need to.
When you've got all of those things done and solved all the problems of the world, I'm sure you've got another list of a dozen. But take us back to the purpose of this gathering, which is collaboration with universities. How important does CSIRO think universities are in linking? I mean, in a way, you're almost kind of like the broker between universities and industry on some of these projects too.
Yeah, look, and so universities, I think, are core. But what we see is in Australia, we have, what they call the valley of death, right? So we're very good at the kind of academic research, TRL level sort of 1 to 3. And then you've got industry at the other end who are willing to invest once technology is at a given level. So what Csiro aims to do is help that gap, that valley of death, TRL 3 to 7, by helping to invest and accelerate and provide facilities and capabilities for R&D before industry is quite ready to take it on, because Australian industry is quite risk averse in terms of applying new science and new technology. And so we hope to be kind of part of the wider ecosystem and introduce, you know, the various schemes we've got. The ON scheme is a good example. So that's an accelerator which has taken teams from CSIRO and from universities and has created more than 50 companies during its time. And I think that's a good example of how we can work together in the ecosystem to kind of fill in all the gaps and address that valley of death problem around converting academic research to what industry needs.
All right, I'll come back to you for more astronomy and space science, I'm sure, a little later in this session as well. But let's go across to the West, because Tim Jones, along with Murray, Tim has a great success story and one that illustrates exactly what we're talking about. And Tim, thank you very much. Tell us the story of Hyperfire, please.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. So yeah, Hyperfire is a fairly brand new startup, recently spun out of Curtin University. So a success in terms of you know, traversing the journey through university, but we've got a fair bit ahead of us, you know, to achieve commercially. So the way that Hyperfire was originated was through a PhD research of our CTO Stefan Prandtl while he was at Curtin, and him and his research team discovered that some statistical mathematical laws called the power laws actually apply to computer network traffic. So it's quite an important scientific discovery. I mean, happily, it also has, you know, quite strong and important applications in cybersecurity. In that, what it effectively means is that, you know, as a result of some of the solutions that we've built, we're able to detect malicious activity that existing solutions can't, based on these power laws. So to give you an example of some of the power law theory, one of the power laws is the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, that a lot of people are familiar with. There's another one called Benford's law, which basically says if you take any text, say the Bible, in any language, in English, the word "the" will probably appear the most number of times. The second word will appear half of the times of the first word. The third word will appear a third of the time, and so on. So you get this decaying exponential curve. Now, this law, sort of in general terms, actually applies to network traffic as well. And that's what we've applied commercially to develop two cybersecurity solutions. So for those who are interested or knowledgeable in the space, one's a network monitoring or intrusion detection system, which is basically anti-malware for your enterprise network. The other one is a distributed denial of service filter.
Okay, so having those discoveries and writing a PhD and developing the theories is one thing. Commercializing it and turning it into a market-ready product is another. So just briefly, I know there's probably days to this conversation if we had them, but we don't. How rough a journey was that?
Look, I mean, I think we had a relative dream journey. If I can, give Curtin, the commercialization team, Curtin generally a plug, in that it was a reasonably well worn path, from a research project to commercialization. So from that perspective, we were lucky. Having said that, I mean, we had all of the usual challenges that any university project has to come to market. I suppose some examples was, building the first prototype. What does that look like? What kind of things does it need to do? How do we prove the concepts, commercially or pre-commercially? We had, I suppose the challenges of making sure that we had enough funding for external consultants and advisors during the course of the incubation process. Sorry,
just pause on that. Do you mean technical advisors on the area of cybersecurity, or are you talking about IP and lawyers and accountants and that sort of thing?
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay.
So, I mean, I guess the way we approached it was to bring in, specialists as and when required. So yeah, we had, the range from patent attorneys fairly on, once we knew what the concept was and the general applications, to make sure that we were protected, legally. And then, during the course of the commercialization process, bringing in other advisors. So, Curtin brought me in as a commercialization advisor, probably 2.5 years ago. Who else? We had electronics, hardware consultants, for certain sort of hardcore software programming. We brought in some software specialists, and I mean, luckily we're able to use Curtin's in-house legal, which was of huge value. We saved quite a bit of money there, I suspect. Yeah, just being, making sure that we're being frugal and just using people as they were required at the time they were needed.
And when we talk always about the risk-averse nature of venture capital, I thought the whole idea of venture capital is that it embraced risk, but what we're hearing over the course of these 3 days is just how shy some venture capital actually turns out to be. How hard was it to find the people with the pockets that were deep enough to do what you needed to do?
Yeah, I mean, so I suppose for myself and the Curtin commercialization team, we've got a bit of experience in, in pitching projects, and we had a fair idea of the kinds of things that investors would want to see before we, pitched an opportunity to them. So from that perspective, I suppose the initial activity was to try and prove, the initial solutions, the prototypes commercially, with commercial partners, and being associated with the university, made that probably a lot easier than if we were just, a startup out on our own, because, Curtin already had a reputation, had trust, with other institutions, and with, large enterprise and medium enterprise. And so we were able to, do pre-commercial trials with some of those organizations in order to prove that the thing worked technically, which is probably the first thing that they wanted to know, does it work? And then, secondly, is it going to be adopted in the market, and is the market big enough to give investors a return? So we did quite a lot of work before we went to investors to make sure that we had our ducks lined up, and we had a compelling story and vision for them. And then at the time that we went out to investors, look, it wasn't easy. I mean, it was the typical startup sort of pitch journey. We did over 100 pitches, I suspect, over the course of 3 or 4 months. But happily, that culminated in being able to, we ended up oversubscribing the funding that we're after, which was a great result.
Let me throw this back. I'll come to Marnie in a moment on this as well. But Sarah, first to CSIRO. I mean, famously, CSL, Commonwealth Serum Laboratories, it's one of the stock market darlings, of course. CSIRO, Wi-Fi, Melbourne Uni, cochlear ear implants. I mean, I could rattle off a list of great successes here. How important is it to CSIRO to see some commercial potential when you're doing early stage research and collaboration with universities? How important is it to you that you might be able to make a buck?
I think what's important to us is to be able to see the potential for impact. Yeah, so commercialization is one way of having impact, but you can also have impact through kind of public good, and government can also be a kind of customer for the work you're doing. But engaging with universities, in order to encourage that commercialization pathway, yeah, that's core. I mean, it's through working with industry in many cases that we can have the most impact for Australia and help solve some of those challenges. So if I give the example of hydrogen, for example, we've got a program with Fortescue at the moment, which is setting up hydrogen facilities around refueling. And that's using CSIRO R&D with a 20 million investment from Fortescue. And it's through that industry engagement that we're able to have kind of real world impact and demonstrate that this research can actually kind of be used. And so, yeah, it's important. I mean, I was interested, you were talking about venture capital as well. I mean, we have the Cso Innovation Fund operated by Main Sequence Ventures too. And I think that's been a resounding success so far. It's invested in 26 companies with links to publicly funded R&D, of which 17 have ongoing links into Australian universities across 16 of the universities. And so, you know, it's a great example, I think, of how if you look specifically for these kinds of technologies and these kinds of opportunities, they are there in the university sector.
Okay, but I mean, Twiggy Forrest is a great philanthropist. He and his wife have endowed all sorts of philanthropic and charitable institutions, but fundamentally he's a businessman and he's been very good at it. He's a billionaire. So his $20 million, I assume he's expecting some sort of a return.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, another good example probably is in our future protein mission, right? And I don't think there is necessarily any dichotomy at all between industrial return and solving these challenges that we were talking about and addressing and using kind of Australia's great R&D capability. So this is a great story, right? We're looking at the future of protein, so plant-based proteins. And if you have recently been to Hungry Jack's, you will see that you can eat a Rebel Whopper, which is a plant-based.
I'm very, very sorry to disappoint. I'm not a regular habitué of Hungry Jack's or Macca's or any of the others, so you're going to have to fill in the gaps for those of us who are not participants.
So, you know, perhaps you should give it a go, because so what we did was our researchers, you know, who are kind of experts in plant industries and in taste and things like this, who look at how you can make plants kind of seem more like meat. And then we brought in Hungry Jack's and with investment as well from Main Sequence Ventures. And now we have V2 Foods, which you have, even if you don't go to Hungry Jack's, may well have seen in your local supermarket, because it's in most supermarkets now across Australia. And so it's a great example, I think, of how by taking the original research, working with industry to say kind of what is it you want, you can address some of these really big challenges like the future of plant-based proteins, you know, which is a win-win there, kind of all round.
What does it taste like though?
What does it taste? It tastes pretty good, and I say this as a vegetarian, so I can't really tell you whether it tastes like meat or not, because it's been a long time since I've had that, but I quite like it.
Oh, we look, I'm happy to sacrifice myself and volunteer up for a blind taste test, and you know, I will head to Hungry Jack's forthwith as soon as this conference is over. Marnie, is this the future? Is this sort of level of collaboration and the stories we've heard from Tim and Murray in particular? You know, we can cherry pick for every success story. Of course, there's dozens who have tried and not succeeded. So how do we go about trying to maximize these opportunities?
Look, it's our future. It's our future, but it's also been our past, John. And I guess my advice is that the more of it, the better. And to reinforce Sarah's point, you see commercial outcomes. So we've got Myriota, CubeSat company, raised 29 million last year out of UniSA. We've got the SmartSat CRC, antimicrobial surfaces. It's hard to imagine possibly a more exciting job than the one I have, which is you just getting streams of emails. So I got another one delightfully from an early career colleague saying, this local council's just adopted my planning framework, which is going to mean less use of space. People are able to stay in their homes. You see that every single day, and you're seeing commercial outcomes which people get behind, but those policy ones are important too. So we've developed a policy framework for approaching and dealing with the volume of child protection issues, and we're wanting to reinforce to people that ingenuity is needed If you're wanting capability in the workforce, we need to make sure and maximise participation in education. So we need to make sure people have safe and healthy upbringings, that they're able to participate, as well as to produce antimicrobial resources and to do human trials on cancer tests, which we're doing at the moment. So there's a cancer drug in human trials in Adelaide, which we're supporting. So you see this every single day. My view is that you have to be open-minded to what you're seeing. This is the whole point of ingenuity, is to back lots of ideas, to assume that some of them fall over, but when they do fall over, they go off into other ideas, which is also good, and to assume that volume is good in this place. And the more people that participate, and particularly we're wanting to encourage people from different backgrounds, more and more women we're seeing participating in this ecosystem, the better it is for Australia.
Okay, I don't want to sound overly negative, but let's go through and pick your brains, and then also Murray and Tim. What are the most common mistakes people make when they approach you and they think they've got, you know, the light bulb moment or the bright idea that's going to change the world?
There's a couple of things that happen, I think, that determine success or fall over. The first is people often have a really good technical idea. And I think Tim has really described beautifully the process of taking a technical idea to market. Involves understanding regulation, IP, law, marketing, communications, a whole broad range of skills. And so some people will identify that startup pipeline as being a purely technical piece. And we have to remind people that it's not. And the environments that we create broker those are about bringing in those capabilities, like Tim talked about, making sure you've got access to a lawyer, people that have got the appropriate regulatory knowledge to help you navigate. So that's the first thing, is not seeing it in one dimension, but understanding that we want you to go to market and we want you to make sure you know who you're pitching it at, who it's going to take hold with, and will it thrive. And the second thing is actually making sure that sometimes people spin out too early. So we might want to hold things in just a little bit longer. So there can be an assumption that an accelerator is a 3-month program or a 3-month or a 6-month program. You go through this thing, you'll have your idea, you'll be ready to go to market. And we'll say the readiness levels of these ideas really varies. And so sometimes our role is to just hold people for a little bit more, even though, you know, I know Tim said sometimes it's hard to get VC funding. Sometimes the opposite happens. People can throw VC funding at you before you're ready. And then your IP is diluted. You then might run out of runway, and then your idea might fall over, and that's disappointing. So sometimes it's about knowing the timing and being able to navigate that with really expert advice inside the university, helping people to do that well.
Penny's just dropped. You're actually the VC for VC, aren't you?
I'm a VP. Please don't promote me. I'm a VP. I'm a VP for VCs. Okay. I work for two kinds of VCs, John. I work for Vice Chancellor and I work for venture capitalists, which is pretty delightful.
All right, well, we got there in the end. Murray, mistakes from where you've been through and where your company's been through, both here, Switzerland, around the world, the most common mistakes that you observe as people seek your advice and perhaps your mentorship from HiQ?
I think in terms of collaboration, some of the things that we've found to be really quite important is that there always needs to be alignment between individual researchers working with individuals on the company side. So there needs to be a connection to really be able to genuinely discuss science and technical problems in a lot of depth. So there needs to be an excitement to explore ideas together at an individual level. The other component to good collaboration we found is to have the right alignment also at an institutional level. So there's a flexibility.
What do you mean by alignment? Sorry.
So it's easy to have a direct dialogue between industry people and researchers directly. So when that right environment is created, it means you can quite flexibly engage on ideas and find a path forward, because often the initial starting idea isn't the one that actually comes out the way you think it will. So it needs agility in how you actually take on new information, discuss it together, and map out a new path forward to solve problems together. So places that enable that very close dialogue and reduce the barriers for that happening, we found to be quite successful. One element to that is being able to actually bring industry partners onto campus to further benefit that direct dialogue. We found to be quite a successful model as well.
All right. If we have time, I'll get back to you. Tim, mistakes, the most common things that you see or that people who come to you for guidance, the things you caution them against.
Yeah, don't fall in love with the solution and remember to speak to customers. So, I mean, this is where university accelerator programs and, you know, entrepreneurship programs are worth their weight in gold. this whole model around the lean startup actually gives you a recipe for, a basic recipe for how you can take something from research to market. Read the lean startup, talk to customers and listen to them, because at the end of the day, you've got to solve a big problem for customers in order for them to pay you any significant money. That's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Why would I listen to my customers? They don't know anything. I'm the guru. I know everything. Why would I listen to them?
Yeah, look, that might have worked for Steve Jobs, but I don't know if it works for anyone else. The rest of us need to, as Steve Blank, one of the famous entrepreneur sort of researchers and book writer, says, you've got to get out of the building and speak to customers. And that's what we're living and breathing at Hyperfire every day. So that, the most important thing for us is getting deployments of our solution and spending as much time with our customers as possible as to, what are their problems and how can we help them solve their problems. It's what it's all about.
Yeah, the best description I've ever heard was work on the business, not in the business.
Yeah.
You can often be so buried and drowned in the intricacies, you actually forget what you're trying to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you had, I'll run through with everybody and I'll come to Sarah next, but if you had one word of advice or one piece of wisdom to pass on to those who are in this field, whether it's from a university point of view or from the venture capital and enterprise and industry point of view, what would it be?
Listen. There's lots of people around who'll give you advice. You don't have to take everyone's advice, but you should listen, take it in, learn from others and the paths that they've trodden. There are people out there who want to help you, and make sure that you listen and you're coachable, and you'll get people to help you on the journey.
And if there was one thing you wanted government to do that might have made a difference to the 100 different pitches you told us your organisation had to do, and you succeeded in the end, but I'm sure for everyone that succeeds, there's probably scores that fail.
Yeah.
What would you ask government to do in order to make it an easier path?
Yeah. Look, I think in terms of government, particularly federal, doing a pretty good job in terms of making grants and funding available for startups. I think something that would be really useful. When startups get to the point of commercializing, what they actually want is sales. What would be really useful is some programs where government agencies and organisations have a mandate to take on sort of relatively high risk vendors like startups, because for us to move from Australia internationally, which is what a lot of companies want to do and a lot of investors want their companies to do, a lot of the international people will say, well, who's using you in Australia?
Yeah. And if your own governments aren't buying your product, why the hell should we?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Buy local.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes absolute sense. Well, Sarah, I don't know if CSIRO is a customer of Hyperfire or not, but let's just go through the same suite of questions with you if we could. First of all, what advice do you give? What mistakes do you see? And what do you think government should do?
Yeah, look, so I think the advice I would give would be, it's kind of a similar kind of one to Tim, but it's network. Right, there are all sorts of kind of people and organizations and capabilities out there that can help you. CSIRO is one of them. We have, things like Lab 22, which is our advanced materials lab, which has helped hundreds of SMEs in kind of new advanced materials. So there are, through the university sector and different sectors, there are all sorts of people out there who can help you. So get out there, talk to people and learn from other people's kind of experience. Because I think people are very keen, to help grow, in particular the SME sector. Mistakes, being unwilling to pivot, I think, is probably, so the most successful SMEs that I've seen have been willing to listen to the customer and identify the market and change the solution, potentially even the kind of entire market sector they're addressing as they listen to the answers that come up in that kind of area. And then for the third side, what the government can do, I'm going to actually draw on some work we've been doing in the space sector. So, that is my background, as you kind of implied earlier. And so we've been working a lot with SMEs in the space sector and with the Australian Space Agency and people like Geoscience Australia, the SmartSat CRC, we have a mission called AquaWatch, which is looking to build satellites and ground-based sensors to measure water quality across Australia. And one of the core things around AquaWatch is not just the water quality data, but it is the ability to grow Australian industry through being a customer. So through buying as much of the satellite and payload in Australia as we can, and engaging with SMEs in order to do that. So one of our very first things is we've bought a CubeSat with a company called Innovor, who are a South Australian spin-out. And so I strongly agree that government has, a responsibility as a kind of first tier customer to help grow this kind of sector and to engage, especially with the SME sector.
All right, and just finally, before I go to Murray and Marnie, government, you want them to be a customer, but are we also, given how tiny we are in global terms, are we also too insular? Are we not opening ourselves enough to not just local collaborations and cross-fertilisation in government, but also internationally?
So absolutely, you have to do both. And so AquaWatch is another good example. So as clearly water quality is a massive issue in Australia, but it's a massive issue for a lot of other countries as well. And so as we've gone, and so as we've gone out and said we're interested in doing this, we've got enormous interest from other groups, for example, in California, from the Canadian Space Agency. And they also bring kind of expertise and potentially capability. We can't do it all in Australia, but potentially working with others, we can come up with solutions that not only address our specific challenges, but then are also potentially an export market. And together we can try and sell them to other countries as well. And so I think through international collaboration, we can help grow Australian companies, grow Australian expertise, but also set ourselves up for export markets in the future.
All right, thank you. And Murray, your company is a Swiss company, effectively with an Australian kind of outreach arm. How hard is it to persuade a Swiss multinational, for instance, or someone whose headquarters is on the other side of the world, that Australia is a place where they should consider investing?
I think the type of thinking there is really where can you access expertise to solve the problems you need to solve. And from that point of view, when we were looking at collaborating with Deakin University, for example, we saw world level expertise around materials and world level expertise around textiles. And so for our space, that was a really unique combination, whether it's Australia or anywhere else in the world. So that was a starting point for us to begin collaboration. And I think one of the other aspects around that is you start small and you see how the collaboration builds and how you work together to solve problems. And what we found is that we have a very good environment here to solve quite a number of problems quite flexibly. And so even from a very small start in collaborating, we've now got more than 6 years of collaborating with Deakin on multiple projects over that time. So the model here has sort of worked, and we've continued to build into that. So whether that's in Australia or elsewhere, it really comes down to the dynamic of how that collaboration builds on itself.
But how do you sell Australia, for instance, if you're in Geneva or Lausanne, wherever your headquarters is? I mean, Australia is so off the radar, it's so exotic, it's so far away. How do you impress upon them that this is where, of all the places in the world, that this is where they should go?
Well, in the end, it comes down to, do you have success when you start small, and do those projects deliver? So the more that does indicate the case that it's successful, then that case makes itself, I think.
All right.
Builds on itself.
The question about government contributions or government involvement, what is it that from your company's point of view, from HiQ's point of view, what do you think is the role of government?
I think part of the ecosystem generally, and of course government's part of that, but in terms of building the right environment to start on that path of collaboration, I think that's a really critical piece of the picture. So often these collaborations start with a very small level of investment, a very targeted project, and then you build on it from there. So mechanisms that allow rapid engagement on relatively small projects, I think is a a very useful place to start, because then you get the collaboration building on itself that can go into some of the other larger scale mechanisms that are definitely in place. But the first step is something to encourage.
And just finally, can you guys come up with some material for a wetsuit that's easier to put on and take off?
I'm taking notes now, John. Thank you.
Have you ever tried to put on a wetsuit or take one off?
I have. I was thinking about it over the summer, actually, with that in mind. So I appreciate the feedback on that.
Well, it's one of the great mysteries, certainly, of Western civilization, isn't it? I know surfing's a relatively new sport in, terms of human history, but you'd have thought it was time now, given that, Rip Curl, Quicksilver, all those people down on the Victorian surf coast a generation ago. It's about time someone came up with the next generation of a wetsuit. And if it's not someone at Deakin University in Geelong in collaboration with the Swiss, well, who will it be?
Well noted. Appreciate that, John. There's a role there for collaboration on that problem for sure.
I look forward to hearing the news. I think you owe it to me to let me know before everybody else, okay?
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. And Marnie, let's get to you on the final set of riddles there, the role of government, international collaboration, mistakes, the most common mistakes that people make and those sorts of things, please.
Look, I think it's really important that we not only support startups that get access to grants, we have to support the environments that generate the ideas, that incubate them and accelerate them. So we've heard everybody talk today about the spaces where they're given advice, mentoring. So you can't support just the spin out and give them access to funding to take them on a runway. You've got to actually produce the environments that do that and recognise that it's not just one environment that does that. There's a big ecosystem in Australia. So why Australia, John? Well, I'm delighted to tell you that we've just welcomed 9 new space firms into UniSA, and we've had global call on this. We've got lots of people from around the world saying that they wish to headquarter, to start up and to accelerate in our space, and that's driven in part by policy settings and support that are seen as consistently in favour of innovation. We've got a state government that's not just invested in Innovor, Sarah, but they've also invested in Myriota. So they've supported the purchase of a CubeSat. It is very important that government gets behind the innovation that we see, and we're certainly seeing that there. But recognise it's not just one object in the system. So Sarah just talked about, AquaWatch, which comes out of another UniSA spin-out SmartSat, the CRC. So recognise that you're going to have a constellation of startups, you're going to have scale-ups, you've got existing firms which are looking to reskill and upskill workers, and you want to work with them to regenerate, that you want to put SMEs in the picture there as well. You're working in a very, very mixed system. But the thing that you can do to make it easier is to recognise that you do have a mixed system and to provide as much stability around support and funding that you can for those environments. And then I think probably the final tip there, John, is when you talk about excellence for universities in particular, don't just think about research, think about enterprise as well. So I'm conscious that our excellence frameworks can often reward the journal paper that's produced, which is fantastic. No good ideas, nothing happens after that, but you also have to, in that excellence system, recognise impact, translation, commercialisation, and also policy changes as well. That's pretty critical.
And is it a false horizon, a false promise, a mirage to sit around waiting for government to come rescuing everybody from their problems? It seems from much of the discussion we've had over the course of these 3 fascinating days, there's a bit of an expectation that government will show leadership, and yet at the same time a recognition that it doesn't. So how much of a trap is it to sit around thinking, oh, the government's going to fix this?
We're not a sit-around organisation. None of the ATN are. We're a get-up-and-go organisation. We go out, we partner every single day, and we're working with not-for-profits, for-profits, corporates, community groups. We're out there every single day doing that. But we're conscious that we exist in a funding system where there's, government support for innovation. And, in the absence of commercial support for some of these things, we do have to look to government for leadership in that space. So if the corporate world were able to support all of this, that'd be delightful, John. We wouldn't have this conversation, but there is a place for government to support as well as for industries to support the pipelines that we're talking about.
All right, and of course we've been talking about the federal government, the Commonwealth government, but state governments have not just a growing role to play, but in COVID we've seen almost a realignment of the federation, and the Constitution, puzzlingly, is fairly mute on some of the fine points that have just developed subtly over the years that we've been federated. What about the state government roles? And in particular in South Australia, we heard from your treasurer the other day and they're playing an increasingly important role in nurturing the whole field of technology and enterprise and linking universities and business.
And look, we always say, John, that federation's a work in progress, but I'm very pleased to say that South Australia, we are really very fortunate to have a government and also an opposition who are highly supportive of the innovation system. And so we're getting very clear signals, very clear and consistent support, and a celebration across multiple sectors. So, you know, the space sector and defence sector are obviously big for South Australia, but equally recognition of the creative sector in South Australia too, manufacturing. So I feel that we're very, very fortunate. And I'm hearing that more and more at the state level across Australia, but also even local councils have their part to play. As I said, there's a local council that's just adopted a policy framework today that we've generated. So those on the ground things can happen at multiple levels of support, and we hope for as much harmonisation and support of innovation as we can get.
Well, if we can get some bipartisanship, maybe it's HiQ, Murray, that's going to knit together some bipartisanship, or maybe, Sarah, it's going to be outer space where we find bipartisanship, I don't know. Or maybe, Tim, you're going to find it buried deep in the bowels of an algorithm of some obscure program somewhere, I don't know. Or maybe, Marnie, you're going to find it in your philosopher poetry investigations, I don't know. But either way, we know that culture, leadership, all of these things are absolutely vital, along with all the other ingredients that you've given to us in the mix. Thank you. It's been, as have all of our panels, this one's been particularly fascinating. Murray, Tim, Sarah and Marnie, thank you very, very much for joining us. The conversation continues on Twitter, hashtag ATN Solutions Summit. And we do have the Chief Defence Scientist, Tanya Monro, joining us shortly. Now that's going to kick off in about 15 or 20 minutes. So keep your browser on, but you've got time now to head off for a cup of tea or a toilet break if that's what you need, and something to eat, check up on some emails, and then we can come back and we're going to hear from the Chief Defence Scientist, Tanya Monro, for the final session of this 3-day ATN Solutions Summit. Looking forward to seeing you on the other side of the break. Now, our video is from University of South Australia to take us through to the next session. Thanks very much.
These new awards recognise the importance that software plays in making our lives happier and healthier and in helping us to imagine the world as it could be in the future. So that fundamental role of software is something that we want to help people to think about, and importantly, these awards are about identifying great ideas, great teams, and giving people the mentoring and the structured experience of taking their ideas, commercialising them, and connecting with community in ways that will lead to fundamentally good changes. When I saw the applications, my first response was, this is totally uni essay.
The Good to Go app does exactly what the name implies. It tells you whether someone's ready to go in terms of their physical performance. So are they good to perform or not? And it can be used to guide athletic training or rehabilitation.
The app that we've developed is called Your Time, and it's an app to help mothers during pregnancy and after birth with monitoring their mood to essentially help them to determine if they might be at risk of depression or anxiety related issues.
The software we've developed is called Variant Grid, and it's used by pathologists to analyse DNA sequencing data, search through it, find the variants responsible for disease and report, classify them and give them back to the clinicians and researchers so they can deliver a diagnosis to their patients.
iFarmWell is an established website to help farmers cope with things beyond their control. Hot years and dry times seem to be becoming more and more common, so having the skills to cope with these sorts of challenges and things beyond farmers' control will become more and more important, and our research has shown that iFarmWell is an effective way to manage that issue.
I do want to note and thank UniSA Ventures, Thomas, Emily, the whole team for all the work, the hard work that's gone in behind the scenes, and from this point on, the mentoring and the support that you get in winning these challenges. You don't just get the certificate and walk away. It's really about how we help you take your really good idea, think about how to commercialise it, connect with the community.
We work closely with the researchers at the university we partner with them. We understand where the research is going. We also understand what the opportunities are for the research out in the broader economy and society. And we then focus on how we can then translate that research into society for the betterment of our environment, our state, and our country.
I think commercialization plays a key role in translating the work that researchers do into real-world impact. And understanding what it takes to create that real-world impact is really what this commercialization challenge is all about. And that's why when researchers come and work with us, we help them understand what the needs of the market are and how they can, well, take their research and ensure that it actually fits the need of the market.
Every one of the entries, I think, reflects our fingerprint as the University of Enterprise, and that enterprise has been committed to a happier, healthier and better world. These new awards recognise the importance that software plays in making our lives happier and healthier and in helping us to imagine the world as it could be in the future. So that fundamental role of software is something that we want to help people to think about, and importantly, these awards are about identifying great ideas, great teams, and giving people the mentoring and the structured experience of taking their ideas, commercialising them, and connecting with community in ways that will lead to fundamentally good changes. When I saw the applications, my first response was, this is totally Uni SA.
The Good to Go app does exactly what the name implies. It tells you whether someone's ready to go in terms of their physical performance. So are they good to perform or not? And it can be used to guide athletic training or rehabilitation.
The app that we've developed is called Your Time, and it's an app to help mothers during pregnancy and after birth with monitoring their mood to essentially help them to determine if they might be at risk of depression or anxiety-related issues.
The software we've developed is called Variant Grid, and it's used by pathologists to analyse DNA sequencing data, search through it, find the variants responsible for disease, and report, classify them and give them back to the clinicians and researchers so they can deliver a diagnosis to their patients.
iFarmWell is an established website to help farmers cope with things beyond their control. Hot years and dry times seem to be becoming more and more common, so having the skills to cope with these sorts of challenges and things beyond farmers' control will become more and more important, and our research has shown that iFarmWell is an effective way to manage that issue.
I do want to note and thank UniSA Ventures, Thomas, Emily, the whole team for all the work, the hard work that's gone in behind the scenes, and from this point on, the mentoring and the support that you get in winning these challenges. You don't just get the certificate and walk away. It's really about how we help you take your really good idea, think about how to commercialise it, connect with the community.
We work closely with the researchers at the university. We partner with them. We understand where the research is going. We also understand what the opportunities are for the research out in the broader economy and society. And we then focus on how we can then translate that research into society for the betterment of our environment, our state, and our country.
I think commercialisation plays a key role in translating the work that researchers do into real-world impact. And understanding what it takes to create that real-world impact is really what this commercialisation challenge is all about. And that's why when researchers come and work with us, we help them understand what the needs of the market are and how they can take their research and ensure that it actually fits the need of the market.
Every one of the entries, I think, reflects our fingerprint as the University of Enterprise, and that enterprise as being committed to a happier, healthier and better world. These new awards recognise the importance that software plays in making our lives happier and healthier and in helping us to imagine the world as it could be in the future. So that fundamental role of software is something that we want to help people to think about, and importantly, these awards are about identifying great ideas, great teams, and giving people the mentoring and the structured experience of taking their ideas, commercialising them, and connecting with community in ways that will lead to fundamentally good changes. When I saw the applications, my first response was, this is totally uni essay.
The Good To-Go app does exactly what the name implies. It tells you whether someone's ready to go in terms of their physical performance. So are they good to perform or not? And it can be used to guide athletic training or rehabilitation.
The app that we've developed is called Your Time, and it's an app to help mothers during pregnancy and after birth with monitoring their mood to essentially help them to determine if they might be at risk of depression or anxiety-related issues.
The software we've developed is called Variant Grid, and it's used by pathologists to analyse DNA sequencing data, search through it, find the variants responsible for disease, and report, classify them and give them back to the clinicians and researchers so they can deliver a diagnosis to their patients.
iFarmWell is an established website to help farmers cope with things beyond their control. Hot years and dry times seem to be becoming more and more common, so having the skills to cope with these sorts of challenges and things beyond farmers' control will become more and more important, and our research has shown that iFarmWell is an effective way to manage that issue.
I do want to note and thank Cso Ventures, Thomas, Emily, the whole team for all the work, the hard work that's gone in behind the scenes, and from this point on, the mentoring and the support that you get in winning these challenges. You don't just get the certificate and walk away. It's really about how we help you take your really good idea, think about how to commercialise it, connect with the community.
We work closely with the researchers at the university. We partner with them. We understand where the research is going. We also understand what the opportunities are for the research out in the broader economy and society. And we then focus on how we can then translate that research into society for the betterment of our environment, our state, and our country.
I think commercialisation plays a key role in translating the work that researchers do into real-world impact. And understanding what it takes to create that real-world impact is really what this commercialisation challenge is all about. And that's why when researchers come and work with us, we help them understand what the needs of the market are and how they can take their research and ensure that it actually fits the need of the market.
Every one of the entries, I think, reflects our fingerprint as the University of Enterprise, and that enterprise has been committed to a happier, healthier and better world.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this, our final presentation for the ATN Solutions Summit. Luke Shee will join me for a quick summation at the end of this final presentation, which is a pre-recorded contribution from the Defence Chief Scientist, Professor Tanya Munro. Thank you very much, Professor.
My name's I'm Australia's Chief Defence Scientist. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you today and present this closing address for the Australian Technology Network of Universities conference. The theme of this conference, which you've been exploring over the last 3 days, of collaboration between business, government and universities, has never been more critical. And today I'd like to share with you some new developments and some thoughts and insights on the opportunities for the ATN universities and researchers within them to partner deeply with government and industry and each other to deliver on some of Australia's most challenging problems in the space of defence and national security. And note that many of the comments I make will be applicable across other domains as well. I'd like to start by recognising that we've been living through the most difficult time that our universities have faced in many decades through COVID-19, and that the decisions made now, whether that's decisions made by individual universities or by government on university policy, will be pivotal in shaping this future for the foreseeable future. Collaboration is key to this. Collaboration, the ability to take great ideas and pull them through to industry, and the relationship between government, universities and industry has never been more critical. To talk to the defence context, last year the Prime Minister launched the Defence Strategic Update and the corresponding force structure plan. I'd encourage you to have a look at these public documents if you've not done so. They paint a really clear picture of Australia's strategic context and really frame everything we're doing at the federal government level to try and secure a future for Australia that is strong and resilient. The Defence Strategic Update has 3 main thrusts, and they're known under the terms shape, deter, respond. It's a bolder posture for Australia, and it's a more confident posture for Australia. And this is really relevant when we think about the role that our universities play. It really completes the shift of Australia being a nation that acquires major defence capability from overseas to one where, in deep partnership with our allies, we more confidently determine what sovereign industry we can and must develop here, how we approach creating resilient supply chains, and what R&D we need to do as a nation to underpin that. To go along with this more confident and more ambitious posture have been a number of changes. One of these is creating a new capability manager role for me as Chief Defence Scientist, responsible across defence broadly for innovation, science and technology. DSTG, which I have the privilege to lead, is just over 2,100 scientists, technologists and engineers across 8 sites around Australia. And I know that there are many academics and senior leaders at this conference who have had strong engagement with DSTG, or in the past DSTO, our predecessor. And our role is also changing to deliver on this new strategic posture. We are now responsible not only for helping de-risk some of the acquisitions and doing the in-house science, research, technology development required to support that, but we're also charged with helping shape the nation's R&D that's happening within our universities and within our industry to better align with defence's biggest problems, and to help our partners, the Australia Defence Force, understand where in Australia the best work happens that can support Australia's requirements, and to shape the conditions so that it can deliver defence capability. So as the capability manager, I'm responsible for making sure that we have that capability, not just within DST Group, but across Australia. Now, the ATN group of universities is a very special group. It's a distinctive group in that it is very aware of the need for good, strong industry partnerships, and that is very positive. And being a group of relatively younger universities, I think has the advantage of agility and the ability to understand how to work differently in changed context. And I think this will be very valuable at this point in time. We have a range of mechanisms and ways that defence works with Australia's universities. Many will remember at the Universities Australia Conference back in 2016 when the Defence White Paper was launched, my predecessor announced the Next Generation Technology Fund, which remains a critical mechanism for us to invest in emerging disruptive technologies for Australia through its 9 themes. Recognising, though, that given this strategic context shift, we need to shape the work we're doing in Australia to deliver on some very special requirements. Last year, we delivered the new Defence Science and Technology strategy for Australia, which is called More Together. This recognises that we need to work actively to help our university partners, our industry partners, understand some of the biggest problems that defence faces and how to engage with us on them. At the heart of this strategy are our new star shots. These star shots are 8 really big challenges that we can't solve with current technology, which drive us, inspire us to develop new ways of working together across government, industry and academia, but also create that creative space where people can come up with crazy new ideas and test them in a defence context. Test them on trials, demonstrations, exercises. Give us the chance to accelerate new ideas and see how we can help together co-invest in taking those ideas right through to industry. To support this aspiration of Australian sovereign industry capability development, we've developed a defence-wide capability innovation strategy, which is due to be launched shortly. It's called Concepts to Capability, and it focuses in on the fact that great ideas can come from anywhere. And that it also recognises that defence is a big, complex, bureaucratic machine. I've mentioned the NGTF, but of course you'd be aware of the Defence Innovation Hub, which also supports university research. And there are other defence innovation mechanisms like the CDIC, for example. Under Concepts to Capability, we've committed to developing a more coherent and connected defence innovation ecosystem, which helps great ideas navigate through this system and get support, get sponsorship, get buy-in, and provides mechanisms for doing things like rapid prototyping and capability acceleration. This is really important because the reason why we need to do this is that the changing strategic context heralds a significantly increased appetite for science and technology, and this is a huge opportunity for Australia's universities. If our universities, our researchers, our networks can show the kind of agility we need to be able to convey some of defence's biggest problems, to be able to listen to some of the potential solutions and explore them together. One mechanism that we're leaning into heavily to help support this aspiration of shaping the national R&D landscape are the state-based defence research networks. As of this year, we now have a complete national coverage with our state-based defence research networks. They're all slightly different. Some of the acronyms you may have heard, the DIN, the DIP, the DSI, the DSC, they take different forms across the nation, but together they form one ADSUN, Australian Defence Science University Networks. This network of networks is an incredibly powerful mechanism for us to increase the level of awareness of opportunities in defence and national security, to connect great talent in our universities with the appropriate people in the defence ecosystem, with industry. They do a range of things that help support this agenda, from networking events to seed funding grants to connecting those elements of the system together. And I am now looking to that network to help us deliver some of the greatest scale we need around these bigger problems. So please look out for opportunities to engage both at the state level with your local network, which will allow us to start to get some of the distinctiveness we're seeking in our university research, to build that scale, to make those long-term enduring partnerships that we need to deliver on these long-term problems. Because we don't have a problem of engagement. I mean, I looked up the numbers across ATN universities since 2015. We've had nearly 600 research agreements, totaling nearly $100 million worth of funding. Those numbers tell you we do have a challenge of too small scale research collaboration agreements. We need to move to longer term, larger co-investments. And this will be facilitated by a deeper strategic dialogue about the areas of focus for our partnerships with specific universities. This is supported by the new Defence Science Partnerships Deed, which came into force last year, and I'm grateful that every university in Australia is now signed up to the DSP, which provides greater confidence and support around some critical aspects, for example, research security. Because of the change in our geopolitical environment, Australian research is much more vulnerable than it was in the past to the threat of foreign interference. And it's really heartening to see how the sector is engaging proactively and positively with best practice measures to help guard against this very real threat. So if you've not seen them, I strongly encourage you to look at the guidelines for countering foreign interference, which came out of the University Foreign Interference Task Force, and seek support from your universities, your state-based defence research network, or from DSTG. We need to make sure that Australia's sensitive and critical research is protected, and it's only through doing this that we can secure an advantage and benefit for Australia and its defence and national security through your efforts and your research. So before I wrap up, I guess I really wanted to reflect that I think we're at a moment in time where there's an opportunity of a greater scale and potential impact than we've ever seen that can come from deep partnership and long-term planning between government, universities and industry. It's really research for purpose, deep enduring partnerships for impact. And it heralds a mission-based approach through DSTG and Defence, our Starshots and our major acquisition programs signal this type of mission-based approach. At Csiro, as you will have heard, the missions signal a similar large-scale, purpose-driven approach. And there's an increasing appetite across government to work this way. And indeed, I think the COVID period, while it's had its challenges, has shown us that when we have a really clear shared purpose, we break down a lot of the barriers, the silos between government departments, different institutions, different sectors, because there's no question why we're doing what we're doing and why it's important. So please lean in, see how you can engage in this mission-oriented, purpose-driven research, forge those partnerships, and I think we will have both greater support for our R&D landscape into the future and greater impact from the very good and very hard work that our university researchers do. Thanks for your time today, and I look forward to continuing that dialogue as we start to really move through the implementation and delivery of these really exciting opportunities.
Professor Tanya Munro, Australia's Chief Defence Scientist, and I got DSTG, DINs, DIPs, DSIs, DSPs and ADSUNs out of that. So there really was a lot to digest, and it's extraordinary to see the level of engagement that Defence have, obviously, with members of the ATN. So that just about brings us to an end. It's been an exciting 3 days, and there's been some absolute highlights. Luke Shee from the ATN wants to say just a few words to wrap us up. And Luke, first question though from me before you get to do your final remarks. If people have missed something during the last 3 days, or they've heard about something and weren't able to catch it at the time, is there a way where they can catch up with Sally Weller or Professor Peter Klinken or Ian Martin, for instance, and all the other remarkable contributions we've had?
Well, firstly, thank you, John, for the mammoth effort of leading our conversations over 3 days. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and it's great that we can do this, me in Canberra, you in Melbourne, and in the virtual space. So that's been a terrific part of leading that conversation, having you here involved centrally. So thank you very much at the outset. Of course, everyone can find recordings of these sessions, information and further details as we put them up onto the ATN website. There's a specialised website for this summit, which is atn.edu.au/Solutions Summit, which people will be familiar with Solutions Summit, which we've been using on Twitter. So thank everyone for all those contributions as well on Twitter, because we've had a really lively conversation from lots of people from across the ATN and of course across the sector more widely, and a lot of patience that people have shown tuning in for 3 days. As well as those who tuned in last night to our special global session with our friends from Europe, which was a terrific session as well. John, a few comments, I think, around this summit, which is there's an absolute universal interest in getting the universities, industry and government collaborating together to benefit the Australian nation. And of course, to look at global issues. The last 12 months has shown us one thing, that we've got issues that we need to face together as a globe. And if we harness human endeavour and human capability and cleverness together, we can achieve lots of wonderful things. So I'm really optimistic about all of the challenges and opportunities that we've had out of these conversations. I think there are lots of lessons learned. I think there's some really good examples and clear indication of some bipartisanship around the priorities in this space. And I think, you know, we've got a terrific bunch of universities in the ATN network, plus our friends at the University of Newcastle, that can really achieve some wonderful things. As I've said many times during my contributions, it does take, you know, us to advocate those things and have some certain certainty and clarity from our policymakers. And also, I think a bit of a buy-in from the corporate sector. We'll do our bit to sponsor and nurture the next generation of entrepreneurs, but we'd love to see more dialogue with the business community. And I think that's going to be our next big step here at the ATN.
Thank you very much. I've learned a lot, including about smelly hiking clothes and wetsuits, and we should have a statue of Professor Roy Green, all of those sorts of things. Your team have been fabulous to work with, but particularly here with me at the Deakin Outpost in Melbourne. Austin Van Groningen's been absolutely invaluable in making sure that the technology works seamlessly from our end. I just want to acknowledge that, but you and your whole team, everybody's been fabulous to work with. So Luke, thank you very much. I've learned a lot and I've enjoyed myself.
Thank you, John. And let me take the opportunity to go through a list of few people to thank. Of course, I'll reiterate my previous thanks to you, John. It's been fantastic working with you. Amanda and Tim at Twig Marketing have helped with the broadcast. A shout out to a regional Victorian small to medium enterprise there in Shepparton. Thank you for all your help. Mark Dunstan and his team at Deakin Downtown, who are hosting John and Austin today and throughout the past 3 days. Stephen Matchett at Campus Morning Mail for sponsoring, working with us and sponsoring and promoting this 3 days of our summit. Of course, the Minister Alan Tudge, the Shadow Minister and Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Richard Miles, former Minister Christopher Pyne, the Honourable Rob Lucas, the Treasurer of South Australia, Professor Peter Clinken, the West Australian Chief Scientist. Of course, we've just heard from Professor Tanya Munro, the Defence Chief Scientist, Ines Willock, CEO of the Australian Industry Group, Roy Green, who needs a statue at UTS, Matthew Linden from Industry Super, Michelle Price, the CEO of AusCyber, Professor Ian Martin, the Chair of the ATN Universities and Vice Chancellor of Deakin University, David Lloyd, the Vice Chancellor of the University of South Australia, ATN panellists, and of course, the University of Newcastle panellists. Thank you for sharing this summit with us and sharing your expertise with great energy and gusto. And of course, my team, it's Austin, Sally, Blair, Patrick, and Nana here at ATN. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you very much. And I guess that's the end.